Lost in the solace of thought, he couldn't help but wonder how the dream he had chased for the entirety of his life could leave him feeling so empty when it was fulfilled. How is it possible that all of my work, effort, blood, sweat, and tears could leave me so alone? Naruto thought to himself. He leaned back against the tree he was seated against and sighed with such weighty melancholy that anyone within earshot would have been reduced to a frown. Well, save one. Ha! Kurama scoffed at him. You thought that you could become a sage of 6 paths, be one of the 2 forces that ended the 4th Shinobi War, defeat the one who fought all 5 cages to submission, defeat the progenitor of ninja, and then become the Jinchuriki of all 9-tailed beasts without estranging yourself? I figured after everything we've been through you'd have a little bit more going on between those ears. Kurama chortled from his position on Naruto's lap. He proceeded to yawn and then curl into a ball and rested his head on his own singular bushy tail. That isn't even fair. Naruto pouted his lower lip out and harumphed while looking to side. And I'm not the Jinchuriki of the rest of them. They just come by to visit, sometimes. Kurama opened one red eye and shot Naruto a glare. Shukaku has visited you through his chakra 5 times in the past week. You managed to tame the madness, and then proceed to befriend even that stupid sand raccoon. I didn't even know Shukaku could be calmed down. Kurama's eye closed again as he stretched before returning to his position. Come on, he just has spent so much time alone after Hagoromo Jiji passed that he lost himself. I couldn't just leave him like that. I figured if I could get through to you then Shu would be a piece of cake. Naruto grinned. It lasted only a moment before the mirth quickly receded and left him feeling as empty as before. Bastard, I'm not saying I disagree with what you did, but the cages know that if you called on any of us then we would be there with you in battle or otherwise. You are the only one since Hagoromo that has the respect of the tailed beasts. They aren't wrong to fear that. Naruto grunted in affirmation. A second later a small smile played across his lips and he flicked Kurama's ear. The fox growled at Naruto, not even bothering to open his eyes. Are you saying that you respect me, Kurama? I think I might blush. Not even if you lived 100 more years. 8 out of 9 isn't bad though. Naruto returned Kurama's growl and the fox snickered back while his body lightly shook from the action. You know if you choose to fight this then they can't make you. Even Sasuke wouldn't be able to do anything about it nowadays. You don't have to do this, kid. Try as he might, the fact was that over the past 50 years Kurama had gotten close to him. It hurt to see his host put himself through this. I made my choice before this began. I chose to chase a power that would make me the best and let me protect everyone. I got my wish and we were able to defeat Kagaya and seal her away. Just like you said, my fault I didn't realize how the next generation would react to that. Naruto gave such a weak smile. When Kurama popped his eyes open and saw the smile so devoid of anything resembling happiness he couldn't help but slowly become enraged. As his chakra seeped out a mass exodus of birds and other creatures could be heard. Naruto once again flicked his ear causing Kurama to try to bite the offending finger. Naruto chuckled and pulled his hand back. A moment passed and he then ran his hand through Kurama's fur. The pair sat in near silence as time passed. The only sound the wind through the trees as all of the wildlife had fled. Naruto. An old gruff voice called out. It's time. Naruto looked up and saw Sasuke standing there. Gray hair slightly above his shoulder and light wrinkles running through his face. Naruto heaved one last sigh and stood up. His young 17-year-old appearance a stark contrast to his aged best friend. How are they leaning? Naruto coughed, using his voice for the first time in weeks. Not good, Dobi. You know I'm not going to make you do this. I'm debating refusing regardless of the decision they make, regardless of the decision you make. Kakashi won't let them do this if you refuse. Sasuke looked down at his best friend with a face filled with utter morose. 50 years ago Naruto would be shocked to see such a sad expression on Sasuke's face, but his friend's face mirrored his own thoughts so perfectly that he couldn't even find it in himself to tease him. We've resolved ourselves to this path, Sasuke. This isn't our world alone. If I'm creating problems then maybe it is time to set off on another journey. Naruto stood, displacing Kurama who floated to the ground and put a hand on his friend's shoulder. He gave him another weak smile and proceeded to walk ahead. Sasuke turned and followed side by side while Kurama trailed behind both. They wouldn't even have a world if it weren't for us. I can't believe it has gotten to this point. Sasuke grunted, mentally running through possible solutions for the umpteenth time as he tried to figure a way out of this that didn't involve a massacre. Something he could convince his friend and everyone else with to not take things towards what was becoming more apparent to be the inevitable end. Kids can't be expected to remember things they didn't live through. Sasuke. We can tell them the stories, but they didn't live through the things we did. We fought and watched people die since we were 12. Some of the new cages haven't even seen death. Naruto explained softly. Sasuke once again grunted. There were no words to describe his feelings about what he knew he was going to be asked to do. You had to do it if they decide. Sasuke. I won't bother this world any longer if it has no need of me. Sasuke wheeled on Naruto and grabbed him roughly by the shoulders. What if I need you, Dobi? Your friends are still here. All of us are here and doing everything we can to fight this. Why are you giving in? Sasuke broke down into tears and Naruto embraced him into his shoulder. An old man crying into a seeming boy's shoulders. Naruto's eyes were listless and empty as he remembered the past few years. After the Fourth Shinobi War, everything seemed like it was going to be fine. Naruto had settled down, was worshipped as a hero. Instead of every day being filled with battle, he was able to relax and spend time with the friends he never thought he would have. The tailed beasts were given freedoms they never expected as well. Each was allowed respective land to roam free unmolested. All except Kurama and Gyuki did so. Kurama was content to stay with Naruto and make sure their meeting place stayed in one piece, as he put it. A flimsy excuse all the Biju recognized, but left well enough alone. Gyuki likewise chose to stay with B until his passing, where he then too left to his allocated land. Regardless, after his time spent studying Fuinjutsu for a, Naruto was able to bind their chakra together, but free Kurama's body from himself like the other Biju. At first Naruto was tasked with a job from Tsunade Ba-chan to go around the world and stop crime. He stopped drug trading rings, human trafficking, dethroned mob bosses and countless other things. When the maelstrom known as Naruto came through, a distinct lack of crime followed. Over the next few years crime almost disappeared. What was the point if any aspiring criminal knew they would get caught? After he stamped out crime in the Leaf, the other nations would occasionally request help with more serious problems as well. All was well and good for decades. The only problem being the distinct lack of social life and grounding that Naruto had. Bouncing from place to place while being repeatedly assigned jobs. This had an unforeseen consequence that Naruto had never predicted. As he continued to stop crime in all ways, shapes, and forms, the ninja from villages were growing weaker and weaker. Gone were the days of risking your village's children in life or death fights. A new age of peace was ushered in and Naruto was its enforcer. After Naruto's generation of cages retired, a new generation took their place. Konohamaru was now the oldest of the cage, the rest were in between 20 to 30. Konohamaru was also the last remaining ninja Hokage. The change surprised Naruto at first. All of the cage had been ninja previously. He shrugged it off and convinced himself that it was just part of the changing times. Since the past 4 decades of peace, it seemed that the need for ninja was dying off. Although the ninja way was still alive and well in Konohagakure, largely due to the preaching of Konohamaru on the Will of Fire, even there the ninja were weaker than in his generation. His problems had started when the new Raikage was dealing with protests in his streets. The people were protesting against the harsh yoke of taxation that the new Raikage had imposed upon them. Something happened and the protest got violent. The Raikage then charged Naruto with discovering who was involved with the protest and rounding them up to be tried. Naruto then went to the Cloud Village and started to do just that. After some brief investigation that would have done Jiraiya proud, he was able to find the home of one of the protesters. Naruto did what was expected and informed the man that he was going to be taken before the Cloud's council. What was not expected was what happened next. The man spun a story about how the protest was peaceful until they were attacked by the ninja police force of the Cloud. People were killed, blood filled the streets and the protesters largely ran. There was violence to be had, but they were not the ones to initiate it. Naruto didn't know how to react. Sure, there were bad seeds in the leaf like Danzo, but no cage had ever gone so far as to exterminate their people publicly in the streets. The Uchiha massacre was the worst thing a nation had ever done to their own people to his knowledge, and even that was carried out in the most cloak and dagger fashion possible. Naruto tracked more and more people down and the story stayed consistent. After hearing the same story for around the 30th time he had heard enough. He stormed to the Raikage's office and demanded to know why an attack on innocent civilians was ordered. He demanded to know the reasoning behind the needless bloodshed. To this day he could still remember the answer he received as vividly as the day he heard it. They weren't innocent people. We asked them to desist and they refused. This was against our law. We had jailed several in the previous protests many times before and yet they continued. An example needed to be made and we did it. You're here to uphold the law, not question it. Naruto sighed in real life. His arms patting Sasuke's shoulder as he continued to cry into his shoulder. It twisted a knife in his heart to see his best friend like this, but he had already made his decision. He was someone who protected his precious people, and they had been protected. Now it was time for him to fade away. We've had a good, full life, Sasuke. I mean, come on, I got to see you have a daughter of all people. Even more impressive is the fact that she didn't turn out broody and reclusive. Naruto teased his old friend and punched him lightly in the shoulder while releasing him. Sasuke gave a watery chuckle and wiped his arm into his elbow. This 5-cage summit has come to a conclusion concerning Uzumaki Naruto and his crimes against humanity. The charges brought forth were destabilizing the world economy, threatening 4 of the 5 nations with force or usurpation, refusing to comply with national policy and assault of the Raikage. In all of the aforementioned matters we find him guilty and sentenced to exile. Said the Mizukage, a young male with blue hair. There was silence following his words, that lasted for less than a second. This is absurd, Konohamaru roared at the assembly. A wizened man in a sea of young rulers. This man is the only reason you have a nation. The only reason any of you were even able to be born. Your predecessors would never have allowed for this madness. He continued to bellow over the gathered assembly of 7. Naruto and Sasuke standing below their elevate seats at a semicircular table. That in itself is part of the problem. The Cage coolly replied. A young woman with red hair running down her lower back. Naruto had reflected in the past that she looked similar to the 5th Mizukage except without a shred of her warmth. The previous Cage threatened to usurp my authority and retake his position should I allow this to pass. Your generation is filled with powerful warriors willing to fly off the handle to dispense their own justice. Uzumaki is the pinnacle of this philosophy. Time and time again have we as nations made decisions only to have them vetoed by the threat of overwhelming force. You made decisions that cost lives, restricted the rights of your people, and slandered what it means to be Cage. Your decisions, as you call them, were mad. Konohamaru continued to shout. His old voice flamed with the intensity of steel being ground against gravel. No matter how many times Naruto saw Konohamaru with his gray goatee and elderly face, he could never stop thinking of him as the scarf-wearing boy he taught jutsu to. Our decisions are ours to make. I suppose I should say our decisions should be ours to make as they clearly have not been. She levied Naruto an icy glare. Exemplifying this is his actions after the revolt against the Raikage. He demanded that the decision to try the criminals be overturned. Then when it was decided by popular vote that they should be persecuted, he demanded that decision be overturned. He then set up his own village for the criminals in land ceded to him by the Hokage southwest of Shimogo when justice was demanded and ferried them away from any consequence to their action. Throughout multiple other incidents across the nations he continued to funnel criminals and their families into his village. After which he gave them such abundance by channeling his chakra into one of the last known users of Mokuton to create a rich landscape filled with life and abundance. The Cage took a deep breath and then pressed forward. He then proceeded to train that village in the ways of the ninja so they could protect themselves. When questioned about the training of a dangerous group of criminals, Uzumaki stipulated that it was purely as a defensive measure and they would not use it aggressively. However, multiple incidents have been cited in which exactly that was done. Usually it was in response to some slight against the name of their god. The people of that village view him as their deity for Kami's sake. When the intent to persecute Uzumaki for his many crimes was made known, they threatened war on any nation that voted in favor. The Cage worked herself up through her speech to the point where it ended with her shouting. "I don't even know where to start with you," Sasuke said in a low, quiet voice that still managed to pierce through everyone in the room like a senbon. First, in the case of the Raikage revolt, a vote was only allowed to take place after a week of intense propaganda which spread the idea that the violence was initiated by the protesters. The Raikage stood and was about to speak when Sasuke pressed on to cut him off. Even though the Raikage and his office never gave an official statement on what exactly happened, the rumor was allowed to circulate before any vote was taken, and he made no attempt to correct the misconception. You all know what the Raikage did. You all know it was intentional, and none of you care. When you tasked Naruto with being a protector, you should have known that he would protect the people in any situation. That includes the Raikage revolt, where he had to protect them from you. Sasuke finished coldly, glaring down the Raikage with a hatred bordering bloodlust. The Raikage quailed before the sheer intensity of his gaze. We could argue about this for another week. We have argued about this for the better part of a year. The arguments have stayed the same for the entire time, and no opinion has changed the slightest iota. If we proceed any longer, Hitaki Kakashi may pass and this decision will ultimately be moot. Regardless of your stance, Sasuke, the 5-Kage Summit has reached their decision. Naruto Uzumaki, what will you do? The Tsuchikage asked. Naruto smiled weakly at the Tsuchikage, knowing that this man was one of the 2 votes in his favor when the die was cast. He was the son of the 4th Tsuchikage and had been brought up hearing tales of Naruto's heroism from his mother. When Naruto had brought grievances to his nation, he responded diplomatically, either convincing Naruto to his side or being convinced to Naruto's. Their relationship was that of distant friends, and it pained him to see that this was how things had ended. I will go, Naruto responded simply. Those 3 short words had the impact of a death knell to his friend standing beside him. Konohamaru's world shattered in front of him. The teacher he had always aspired to make proud, who had trained him and taught him what it meant to be a ninja. I couldn't save him, Konohamaru mourned internally. He slumped back into the chair as all intensity left his body. He appeared a lifeless marionette whose strings has been cut. The sheer devastation that the situation wrought on his emotions was catastrophic. A shame deeper than any ravine. A hopelessness and emptiness so expansive it encompassed him in its entirety. Whereas the Tsuchikage also appeared saddened, the other 3 Kages could have defined smug. They had finally got what they had been working towards the past half-decade. In the event that this was approved and agreed to by Naruto, there are a list of demands set by Hitaki Kakashi for him to be willing to proceed. Sasuke stated at a pace so slow it seemed like each word caused him physical harm. The faces of the 3 Kages lost their smugness and turned into various aggressive frowns. He pressed on despite their looks that said they very clearly did not wish him to do so. Firstly, let it be known that the village Naruto founded, the village hidden in the maelstrom, will not be aggressed upon by any of the Kage under any circumstance. If any individuals from the village act out after the verdict, they will be dealt with on an individual basis. All of the Kages will agree that an action by an individual cannot constitute an act of retaliation on the village itself. The 3 Kage leaned in and whispered to each other while Konohamaru gave a smile towards Sasuke. Internally he thanked Kakashi for at least helping to protect the legacy of his teacher. We reluctantly agree to this. The Mizukage responded. Sasuke nodded and then continued. Secondly, all of the Biju who wish to leave with Naruto will be allowed to. This stipulation had the Raikage standing up again ready to interject. Sasuke proceeded to again ignore this. This stipulation is put in place because the main argument to your banishment is that Naruto is too powerful to be controlled. The Biju have always upset the balance of power in history when sought to be used as weapons or even as deterrents, and go exactly against the philosophy you used to justify his exile. That aside, under the influence of Naruto, even the most violent of the Biju have been calmed. Inciting their wrath would lead to wanton destruction. Not to mention jailing them to a container which they would not consent would be impossible, Sasuke concluded logically. Finally, the Raikage would take no more. The Uchiha have the ability to subjugate the tailed beasts. Although not as proficient as Uzumaki himself, we also have some few who know the old ways of Fuinjutsu. We would absolutely be able to contain the Biju and have every right to use them to prevent war as in the days of old. The Raikage raged towards a resolute Sasuke. He was about to continue when he felt a hate so palpable that it robbed him of his ability to speak. A rage so intense he felt like he was drowning in a pool of tar so thick that he couldn't hope to move. All of the cage but Konohamaru started gasping for breath as if they were suffocating, and even he was wincing as if in pain. "You dare think to enslave us again?" A voice rumbled from outside the room. The double doors burst open and Kurama slowly stomped into the room. Although he was much larger than he previously was, he still only stood 6 feet tall, but now in possession of all of his tails. Each step he took intensifying the miasma of hate that was enveloping them all. Naruto looked back and was about to placate Kurama when a blast of his chakra so intense caused the Raikage to faint. The remaining Mizukage and Cage now received the bulk of his ire. "I will give you one chance to revise your stance on this. It appears that the Raikage is indisposed, so I will presume you insects fit to speak on his behalf. The council will accept the terms for all willing Biju to leave along with Uzumaki." The previously proud Cage practically squeaked out. Her voice brittle and weak under a power that so greatly and unfathomably surpassed her own. The malice started to recede as he gave them a withering glare. Kurama growled and turned back out through the door. Sasuke looked smug and would probably chuckle in any other situation. "Neither I nor my daughter Sarada would be willing to subjugate the Biju, and hopefully that demonstration shows that even if you have not morally reconsidered your stance, you would not have the power to. So although you may consider the decision made under duress, I can assure you it is the right one," Sasuke stated with a little more joy than was professional to show. "I indeed," the Cage concluded. "The final demand is simple. Hitaki Kakashi's eyes will be preserved and safeguarded by the Uchiha clan. If the council ever deems fit to reverse their decision, then a descendant of my lineage may venture forth and seek to invite him back to this dimension if and only IFHE is willing," Sasuke concluded. "That is easily the most agreeable of the terms. If it is the will of the council that Uzumaki return, then we will let him." The Mizukage agreed. Sasuke was slightly amused that they seemed aware that the Tsuchikage and Hokage would agree to anything in Naruto's favor, so they only needed one of them to defect to change the vote on any decision. "Then we will set off to where the Biju are gathered to offer them their chance to leave. I have no desire to be in a room with you bastards any longer than possible. Were it not for the fact that I needed to stay behind to guarantee you kept your promises, I would not want to be in the same dimension as you either." Sasuke barked at them. He quickly turned and left, putting a hand on the seemingly shell-shocked Naruto's shoulder and guiding him out the doors. He continued to lead him out the winding corridors to the exit, all the while keeping a guiding hand on him. Kurama followed closely behind in utter silence. Throughout all his years he had never seen his friend look so fragile, so broken, so betrayed. Every fiber of his being was telling him to go back and threaten the council into submission. Only the knowledge that Naruto would actively fight him if he did held him back. "You know, even though we knew it was hopeless, I thought just maybe I'd done enough. Maybe they'd realize that all I ever wanted was to help people and make sure that everyone had a chance to live a good and honest life. I thought that maybe, just maybe they'd realize what they were doing wrong and repent, so we could come to some kind of agreement to help all the people who had been wronged. I guess even at 67 I'm still a kid." Naruto slowly let out all of his emotion. Everything he had worked for held against him, all of the energy he had invested drained out of him. The utter emptiness threatened to consume him until Sasuke grabbed him by the shoulders and turned him to face his old friend. "Don't you worry, Dobi," he almost sobbed, the beginning of tears forming in his eyes. "I found a place where you can finally live a good life. You can relax, chase dreams, or do whatever you want. I did everything I could to find a place where you could be happy. Just promise me you'll try to be happy." Sasuke once again broke down on his friend's shoulder. Naruto once again embraced his friend as his own eyes started to water. "I promise," he replied quietly. He wondered if he could turn back time, if he would make different choices, but even now he stood by every decision that he had made, however disastrous the end. He heard the sound of footsteps and looked to his side to see Konohamaru walking out of the building. "Nikken?" Konohamaru softly questioned, an unspoken question that Naruto heard without it needing to be said. "I'll be all right, Konohamaru. It is just the start of a new adventure. I'll go give this new place hell," Naruto joked to attempt to lighten the mood of his student and longtime friend. He knew that Konohamaru had tried his best to stop this. He had offered trade concessions, land, favors and everything in between to try and win one of the 3 votes to his side. It just hadn't been enough. "I'm going to find you a way back home, Nikken. When I do, you come back to me, all right?" The elderly Konohamaru demanded. Even now it felt like he was the crying kid he remembered all those years ago. Naruto smiled a warm and loving smile at his dear friend. You don't waste your whole life trying to find me a way back, you hear? Just know that if you guys ever need me, I'll be there for you. I'll do my best to make sure Kurama and Shu don't break anything wherever they are sending me. Naruto continued to try and lighten Konohamaru's inconsolable mood. Yet with that seemingly innocuous joke, Konohamaru let out a chuckle. Between trying to keep those two behaved and trying to convince those morons to change their mind, I can't quite say which of us has the harder job. He joked back. Kurama let out a low and unserious growl. This kid being able to make me do anything? Here I was thinking that your humor would be as bad as the third's. Kurama fired back. Finally the group shared in a moment of laughter and the tension began to lift. Naruto basked in the warmth of their friendship and tried to avoid the fear of what his life would be once he lost it. After a while of basking in the much-needed afterglow of a happy moment, Sasuke turned to Naruto. It is time to go, Naruto, he said softly. Words so soft because of some primal notion that if they were quiet enough they would somehow be able to avoid breaking this moment. Okay, Naruto replied. Naruto strolled through the streets of Vale with a confident gait to his step. For the first time in a long time he was excited to actually do something. He scratched his head guiltily, realizing that as far as his promise to make sure he found happiness, he wasn't exactly doing the best job so far. That stops today though. I'm going to ace this test, get into school and finally be cool. Naruto beamed internally. I felt sorry for you when you were forced to leave the elemental nations. I thought the sorrow might actually break you. Yet here we are 1 year later and your grand plan is something as banal as going to school. If I could go back in time and take back ever feeling the slightest bit of pity for you, I would. Kurama groaned mentally at Naruto as he plodded alongside him down the road. Naruto stuck his tongue out at his companion. I'm so sorry, I thought I'd actually do something I found fun. You're right, we should have continued meditating in the forest and gathering information for another year. That was a hoot and a half for the first one, right? Or maybe you were hoping we'd take over the world and see if anyone could stop us. Naruto snarked at his companion. Naruto, you have the best ideas. Let's do that. I haven't killed anyone in ages. If we declared ourselves supreme rulers, then surely someone interesting to kill would come along. Shukaku giggled maniacally inside Naruto's head. The shinobi gave an exasperated sigh, having become all too used to dealing with Shukaku after having him sealed inside for the past year. Shu, I thought we got over your need to kill people. We've been working on it for 40-odd years now. Naruto berated the raccoon. Shukaku did nothing but giggle more. I've gotten over it, Naru. Just because I don't feel the need to kill people doesn't mean I don't enjoy it though. You never said I had to stop doing that. Kid, I've reconsidered. Give me back bloodthirsty, mad, and mentally unstable Shukaku. This docile housepet makes me want to retch. Kurama jokingly begged. At least Naruto hoped he was joking. Bizarre as Shu's nickname for him was, he quite preferred it to him convincing him to kill people on a day-to-day basis like what happened with Gaara. Lighten up, Kurama. This is the first human since Tucson that Shukaku has actually managed to get along with. If we want to be optimistic and look at this as a fresh start for Naruto boy, then it is almost like a fresh start for him as well. Gyuki chastised Kurama. Though the 8 and 9 tails had long since gotten past their dislike of each other, it didn't stop them from bickering like 8-year-old brothers. Yeah, whatever you say, 8. Just know if you start calling the kid anything that's stupid, I will personally turn you into calamari. I would like to see you try. I wouldn't even need to try, you 8-tailed giant cephalopod. Tucson gave you one more tail, and over the millennia you still haven't shut up about it. Killing each other could be fun too. Shukaku interjected gleefully. Naruto once again gave an exasperated sigh at the antics of the 3 Biju who chose to come with him. Blocking them out mentally, he continued down the street with Kurama following along with him. When he left the elemental nations a year ago, these 3 decided to come with him. He wasn't particularly surprised that Gyuki had chosen to tag along considering how close they had gotten over the years through B, but the fact that Shukaku agreed to be resealed to a host was completely out of left field. The remaining 6 Biju decided to stay behind and had all agreed to lump a little closer together to avoid being taken advantage of again. After the experience with Madara, they were hesitant to spread out again without Naruto around. They didn't think there were any people left that could pose a threat to them, but a little paranoia never hurt. Naruto continued wandering towards a bullhead station as he remarked how out of place he looked. Maybe I should have gotten some different clothes, he thought to himself with a hint of embarrassment. He was wearing his sage cloak, which continued to lightly billow in the wind as he walked. He had to return the toad scroll to Ma and Pa when he left the elemental nations, but they wanted him to keep his cloak to remember them by. Under threat of having it shredded by Kurama's claws, Naruto was reluctantly forced out of his usual training jumper and into some orange sweatpants with a black shirt that had the Uzumaki symbol in orange on the front. Even then his fox companion still complained there was too much orange. He is almost entirely orange, Naruto growled to himself. And I look good. You look like an idiot. Kurama insulted the blonde shinobi. Naruto almost kicked the walking fox, but he nimbly jumped out of his range. That was probably for the best, considering he couldn't imagine a scenario where he started fighting with Kurama in the streets and things went well. After one last sigh, Naruto reached the bullhead station and managed to find one that was departing for Beacon. You heading to Beacon, kid? The pilot inquired without even glancing in his direction. Yeah, meeting a professor there. Naruto responded briefly, loading into the bullhead before even being given permission. Hang tight then, we're wheels up in 5. The pilot responded. Naruto pondered the phrase, considering he was fairly certain bullheads didn't have wheels. After a short wait and no one other than him boarding the bullhead, they made their way to Beacon, where he got let off. When he got to the ground he felt a little worse for wear. Kami, that feels weird. I never felt like that flying on size birds. Naruto complained internally. Less bitching, more walking, kid. If you're hellbent on going to school again, then I'm not going to let you be a dunce like last time. We're showing up to this meeting on time. I'm not dealing with another lifetime of teachers thinking you're an idiot. Kurama commanded his host, pulling his pant leg with his mouth until Naruto started moving on his own. Come on Kurama, I think I have enough life experience at this point to handle a simple school for kids. Naruto laughed to himself. This would be a piece of cake. You are 3 minutes late to your interview, Mr. Uzumaki. Is this the care that we can expect you to show to your tasks should you enter this school? Is being on time to an interview above and beyond the professionalism we can expect from you? A blonde teacher asked him with a curt voice and a tongue of barbed wire. Naruto physically flinched at her reprimand while trying to drown out Kurama's uproarious laughter. It'll be easy, the kid says. I've got life experience, he says. I like this one kid, you should try to get on her good side. She might be good for your first romp in the. Mr. Uzumaki, are you paying attention? The teacher lashed out at him verbally. Kurama snickered verbally from his position wrapped around his shoulder in his one-tailed form. The teacher's eyes narrowed at the fox that for some reason seemed to be enjoying this. Yes, professor. Absolutely 100% entirely focused and concentrated on what you are saying. Naruto replied quickly, not wanting to provoke any more ire from this hellcat of a woman. She was holding what he had only recently learned was called a riding crop in her hand and constantly gestured with it like she was 2 seconds away from mauling him with it. The sight didn't imbue him with an overly large sense of confidence in his situation. Good. You'll be meeting with Professor Ozpin to conduct your interview right away. The interview is largely done on his own terms, but you can expect to have to submit to an aura test, a semblance review, and a possible spar between a student of the school. The professor lectured to him while continuing to walk at a brusque pace. They eventually reached an elevator where she keyed something into a keypad before it opened. Kami, this technology still surprises me. I know we had made advances back in the elemental nations before I left, but I guess I just never really got to see much of them. Even then I don't think they were like this. Naruto thought to himself. He then looked to the teacher and steeled his resolve. I'm sorry, professor, but I feel like we've gotten off to a bad start. I just wanted to apologize and say I'm absolutely going to take this seriously, Datbayo. Naruto grinned at the teacher. Kill me. I thought I got rid of that years ago. Naruto internally bashed his head against a wall after hearing that childish phrase of his come back. He could hear all 3 Biju laughing at him. Despite his inner embarrassment, the teacher seemed to, well, it wasn't a smile by any means, but he supposed her lips appeared to be in a less tight frown. Hey, that's gotta count for something. Just make sure you take this seriously. It is very unusual for the headmaster to conduct an interview on someone with such a lack of qualifications. I hope you're sure you are ready for the rigors of this school. When the professor replied with her harsh voice, it sounded slightly less harsh. At least Naruto thought that it did. He couldn't exactly discount wishful thinking at this point though. After what felt like a lengthy travel upwards, he finally followed the professor as she disembarked into a large office. One desk was at the right and he assumed that was where he would find this Professor Ozpin. However, upon squinting his eyes just to be sure, he came to a realization. There is no one there. He remarked simply to himself. The professor that led him in lightly bent her writing crop between both her hands. Her teeth seemed to lightly grind together and Naruto could feel her glare piercing through a man who was supposed to be at his desk and yet clearly wasn't. Professor Ozpin should be here shortly. Why don't you take a seat across from his desk and wait for him to arrive? I shall attempt to locate him for you. The woman seemingly seethed as she opened the elevator door again and proceeded to head down. Naruto shrugged and decided that he might as well take a seat as suggested. About halfway across the office he stopped suddenly as his eyes narrowed. Naruto boy, Gyuki cautioned, quickly tapping into his sage mode, something he had learned to do in mere moments over his long periods of training. As he wandered, he quickly noticed a presence behind a wall to his left. You know, that lady is pretty scary. I wouldn't want to be you when she finds out you were in your office the entire time. Naruto called out as he looked in the direction of the person he detected. He quickly released his sage mode as his pupils returned to normal. Interesting that you would call a professor of a school you are applying to scary, but in this instance I can't help but agree with you. The voice called out from behind the wall. The wall itself seemed to open outward like a door as it was pushed by a cane. From behind it came a bespectacled man in a green suit with messy gray hair. I don't get it, what do those glasses do? They are so tiny and so far down on his nose. Shukaku questioned. If he was in a physical form, you could imagine his head actually tilting to the side in confusion. Naruto chuckled at the observation and then proceeded to watch the professor as he walked around and took a seat at the desk. After a moment's pause, Naruto also chose to sit down at the chair provided for him. Kurama then jumped up and curled up on his lap and started to pretend to nap. So Mr. Uzumaki, what brings you to Beacon? It is not the most normal thing for a student without previous schooling or apprenticeship to decide they want to become a huntsman. What drove you to your decision? Ozpin asked him. Kid, watch it around this one. I don't like the way he feels. Kurama cautioned. I agree, Naruto boy. This one has the eyes of a predator, don't give him too much to go off of. Gyuki concurred. If anything, seeing the two finally agree on something put Naruto more on edge than anything else. Well, I grew up by myself without anyone to care for me. It was a pretty rough life and I just wanted to try and help everyone that I could. Sometimes people are down on their luck and just need a hero, you know? Naruto replied with a grin. Rather than try to lie, he figured using the whole truth would make it easier to hide. If this old man didn't see any reason not to trust him, then maybe he wouldn't push for any questions he would have to lie about. The professor smiled back at him, giving Naruto a small measure of relief. So you mentioned in your letter for application. I'm glad to see that wish was genuine. Was there any other reason that you wished to attend? The professor probed again. To be honest, I don't really have any friends. I thought this would be a nice way to get some. Naruto replied, to which the professor raised an eyebrow. Naruto slightly panicked and quickly added, I'm totally serious about the helping people thing though. That is definitely motive number one. I just thought this might be a chance to not be alone. Something is off about this child. Ozpin thought to himself as he observed the spiky-haired blonde boy with a fox in his lap. He sounds less like a child confined to a solitary existence and more like one who has loved and lost. Perhaps he lost his friends to the grim? Maybe a victim of circumstance? Ozpin continued to spin ideas quickly around his head but could come to no conclusions. He then decided to speed this along to save the child any unneeded stress from a prolonged interview. Most certainly not because he did not want to be caught in Glinda's rampage should she return before he finished. Seeking friendship is something we encourage here at Beacon. We believe a team will work better together and weather the physical and mental fatigue better with the support of friendship. I am nothing but glad to hear that you seek things as such. Ozpin allowed the child a smile. Since I find your motive to be satisfactory, we'll next move to the aura and semblance-based part of the interview. Have you had your aura unlocked, Mr. Uzumaki? Yes, sir. Unlocked and versed in it. Naruto replied with a chipper attitude. Below him the fox's ears flicked. Good, good. Now before we proceed to the aura test, could you describe your semblance to me? Possibly demonstrate it if it is not dangerous? Ozpin requested curiously. The child blinked twice and then started to talk. Yeah, sure. So I have 3 guardian spirits of my home that allow me to channel their powers. Each of them allows me to use different abilities. This fox here is Kurama. He was the first spirit that I learned to cooperate with. Other than him I work with Gyuki and Octopus Ox and Shukaku a Tanuki. Naruto added on. He then brought his hand to his stomach and 2 bizarre creatures appeared on the side of each shoulder, each a bit larger than a fist. Ozpin observed that the Tanuki appeared to be made of sand whereas the Is that truly an ox octopus? Ozpin thought to himself as he slightly squinted at the pinkish thing on his right shoulder. It appears to be missing a horn. I wonder why. So if you can have them all of these guardians out at one time, why do you not? Ozpin questioned the boy. Well, to be honest, it is because Gyuki and Shukaku don't like being out too often, they find it exhausting. Kurama on the other hand basically demands it. He only returns to his realm when absolutely necessary. Naruto answered sheepishly while rubbing the back of his head. Ozpin arched an eyebrow at the boy inquisitively. Picking up on his intent, Naruto added. Sometimes when we need to get groceries or go into certain places, a large fox stalking about can cause some problems. The fox opened one eye to look at the boy and then appeared to scoff. Well, that is interesting. I wonder if these guardians are sentient. Well, I won't continue to bore you for details. Assuming a normal or above aura level 1, believe you would be a fantastic addition to Beacon Academy. Ozip smiled at the child who grinned back happily. He truly felt like the boy's smile would be contagious at the school. Maybe he would even make Glinda smile. At least I can dream of such a world. Ozpin sighed to himself. Ozpin then stood up and opened a drawer to his desk and pulled out what looked like a simple glass and metal weight scale. He walked around his desk and set it down next to Naruto and proceeded to sit back down. Now what you need to do is stand on that scale and attempt to flare your aura out if you can. That should give us a measure of how much you have. Ozpin informed him. Naruto started to look nervous and gave a small chuckle. What exactly am I shooting for here? You know, so I can be at the top of my class and stuff. Naruto laughed in a manner that seemed forced. Ozpin observed the boy quizzically. Is he worried that his aura is too low? Is most of his aura stored in these guardians of his and they merely grant it to him? His semblance is so bizarre, I'm not sure if this will be an accurate measure of his prowess. An average student in their first year score between 100 to 200 on this scale. The upper-level students would average in between 400 to 500. An average high-level huntsman will hover around 2000. Ozpin was cut off as Naruto stepped on the scale. It sparked violently and then the display dimmed out completely. Shit, Naruto swore mentally. Kurama smiled a toothy grin from his position on the chair Naruto had vacated previously, and Shukaku was laughing hysterically from his shoulder. I really don't know what you expected standing on an energy measuring scale with 2 biju on your shoulder, kid. Kurama playfully chastised his partner. Naruto looked to Gyuki and Shukaku and facepalmed. I forgot you two were there, shit. He swore again. Shukaku's unabated laughter seemingly renewed as Naruto twisted his seal, causing both of the biju to disappear from his shoulder. He then looked up to Ozpin, who was eyeing him curiously. Come on, think of something to say, Naruto. 67 years of experience, you got this. It seems that this scale was defective. Naruto declared authoritatively, his face seeming to be the picture of confidence. Below the surface, however, the best excuse I could come up with was, it must be broken. I really should have spent more of my time learning to lie, or at least talking with people. You'd think I was still a kid. Indeed, Ozpin stated simply, eyeing Naruto with almost unrestrained curiosity at this point. Perhaps we will try another then. Ozpin reached for another scale that appeared identical to the first one and passed it to Naruto. Naruto gingerly reached out for it and gently set it on the ground next to the first one. Naruto stared at it as if the scale was challenging him. Well, I never back down from a challenge. Restrain all of your chakra, you three. I'm going to try and lower my chakra flow as much as possible. Naruto started to deeply breathe in and slowly breathe out. After a few reps of this, he stood on the scale. He let out a cheer as the scale didn't basically explode this time. He was less enthused when a string of question marks appeared on the scale. That would mean the scale is unable to accurately measure your aura. Have you taken an aura measurement test before? Ozpin asked Naruto with eyes narrowed at him. Naruto was beginning to think he was drawing far too much of this professor's curiosity. Nope, never done this before, not a single time. What if we just give me a test run in the school, and if I don't perform well you can always just throw me out? Naruto suggested desperately. Ozpin once again arched the dreaded eyebrow and once again reached into a compartment in his desk. Let's try one more test before we get to that point. Here, let's try this. Ozpin pulled his arm out of his desk to reveal a scale, but unlike the last two this one appeared to be larger, heavier and more sturdily built. Try once more with this one. Ozpin asked as he passed the scale to Naruto. Okay Naruto boy, we're going to try to actively contain your chakra this time. We'll try to get it as far down as possible so we can pass this test normally. Gyuki informed Naruto. Naruto nodded physically and took a deep breath. With great anticipation he stepped onto the scale and nervously watched as a series of numbers flicked on the display like a slot machine. After a few moments Naruto almost leapt in joy when he saw that finally this scale had displayed a number. Good job you guys, we did it. Good job holding back. Naruto praised his Jubi. Kurama laughed and it sounded like air being pushed from his mouth. Shukaku started another giggling fit and Gyuki face-palmed in Naruto's mental landscape. Check the number kid, Kurama suggested, still laughing. Naruto leaned down and squinted at the number. Huh, that's weird. From here it looks like it is saying 9001, Ozpin stated calmly as he looked at a handheld device that was clearly somehow attached to the scale's readings. Naruto's thoughts started to race at 1,000 miles a minute. Oh Kami, he said the average score was 2,000 for their fully trained. I just quadrupled that. Naruto internally panicked. Kurama and Shukaku both continued to laugh in their own way. Quadruple and a half Naru. You think you could do math better at this point? Shukaku teased. I was trying to make myself feel even slightly better Shu. Thank you for ruining that. Naruto seethed at his Tanuki companion who couldn't help but beam back at him. Searching desperately for an excuse Naruto said the first thing that came to mind. I guess my semblance must affect the scales somehow. Naruto chimed in helpfully with a smile on his face. That has to work. From all the information I've gathered over the past year I don't think anyone has a clue how semblances work. If I blame that then I should be home scot-free. That is completely possible. The professor stated simply. Naruto gave an internal sigh of relief. However perhaps your fox guardian could attempt to stand on the scale. Ozpin asked what appeared to be a question, but his tone stated it as more of a command. That sounds like an absolutely terrible idea. Naruto replied altogether too quickly. And why is that? He is a being of pure energy and aura. If I did that to your scale I really don't want to know what will happen if he gets on it. Naruto logically defended himself. Surely the professor didn't want to break his fancy scale. Humor me. Naruto's hopes and dreams crash landed on an island with no hope of rescue. He was about to rally another defense when Kurama lithely stepped down onto the scale for not but 2 seconds. He then got off of it and curled back into a ball on the chair. One might have been confused why he left the scale so quickly when it took around 10 seconds to calibrate Naruto's own aura. Upon observation though the answer was quite simple. The scale was on fire. Naruto sighed the heaviest sigh he could remember sighing for the better part of his lifetime. Now laying on a bed inside a single dorm room the headmaster had decided to let him reside in until the school term began tomorrow. He would have started trying to relax if being behind closed doors didn't lead to Kurama's laughter escalating to a dull roar now that he no longer had to pretend to be a simple fox. Holy shit kid, that was the funniest thing that I've seen in the past century. I can't remember a time you've panicked so bad. Kurama teased jovially as he was still wrought with fits of laughter. Naruto scowled and threw a pillow at the fox who was curled up on the floor rug. He easily dodged out of the way but it felt cathartic anyway. I thought he was going to throw me out then and there. Instead he goes, "Welcome to Beacon Academy Mr. Uzumaki." Gives me a key card for this room and then sends me off. What the hell is this place? Naruto vented his frustrations freely, having already set up a fuinjutsu seal on the wall to soundproof his room. He also had checked for cameras and listening devices because he didn't put it past that old man to have a few. Thankfully his search had turned up empty so he could try relax. He most certainly is an odd one. He felt incredibly intelligent and was very shrewd. I couldn't get a read on him myself. Gyuki grumbled grumpily. He didn't appreciate the fact that someone was able to so thoroughly conceal their intentions from him. He prided himself on his perceptiveness. 8 is right. Even with my ability to sense emotions, I didn't get anything off the man. He almost felt inhuman. Kurama added, equally miffed that he couldn't get anything off the professor. He looks really fun. We should fight him. Shukaku added joyfully. I would like to revisit the motion to revert Shukaku back to his previous self. Kurama grumbled. If I meet anyone else with his level of sunny disposition, I'm going to eat them. Let's just go to bed and wait until the remainder of the students arrive tomorrow. I'm fucking done with this day. Besides, the age to enlist at this academy is 17. I'm sure the students here are more well-rounded than the kids back at the academy. Naruto replied. He turned off the lights and hopped into bed. Kurama nestled up against him and they both quickly fell asleep. It was on the morrow that Naruto was going to be reminded how utterly wrong a person could possibly be. That is unnecessarily large, Kurama commented from his perch atop Naruto's shoulder. Naruto couldn't help but agree as the massive airship touched down. He was seated, legs crossed atop the school's roof in sage mode. A few birds had flown down to attempt to greet him but were immediately scared off by the lump of fur occupying their intended perch. Naru, why are you scouting these little people? Do you think the tiny ones will help us conquer the world? You intend them to be our foot soldiers. But wait, couldn't you just make clones? I'm confused again. Shukaku continued to attempt to understand the machinations of his host in earnest while the other three felt an intense wave of exasperation. Shu, we really have to work on your people skills. You know, you might have to actually talk to some of these people if I introduce you? You can't be telling them you want to kill them, or subjugate them, or any other number of insane things I can imagine you saying. Naruto scolded his Tanuki friend. Kurama gave a breathy laugh atop his shoulder. I've got to hand it to you, kid. 67 years later and you can still manage to surprise me. Naruto preened at the perceived praise from Kurama. How a human can live that long and still be so delusional is really a supreme work of effort. Maybe you should write a book detailing exactly how one can reach and maintain such levels of naivete. Naruto growled at his fox and punched him in the head. Kurama then lashed out and clawed his face. In a matter of moments the two were wrestling back and forth on the rooftop in a mix of tooth, fist, and claw. Naruto boy, act your age and focus on what you came here to do. Kurama is a lost cause, don't waste your breath. Gyuki scolded the shinobi. The fox and ninja comically stopped mid-grapple, grunted and then disengaged from each other to resume their previous position looking over the school grounds. Looking over the school grounds. Alright, good. Now start searching for anyone who might be a good friend for Naruto boy. Kurama scoffed atop his Jinchuriki's shoulder but nonetheless narrowed his eyes at the airship, waiting for the passengers to begin disembarking. Not a moment later a large hangar door opened and a ramp led down off the ship. Kurama flicked his tail disinterestedly as he continued to watch kid after kid walk out of the airship. He gave a bored yawn until he was rewarded with a sight that made him break out into a toothy grin. Blonde bombshell straight ahead. She looks like she'd be the perfect friend for our little kid. Kurama suggested deviously. Naruto leveled a glare at his partner. Any reason that you are suggesting this other than how she looks? Gaki, you wound me. Naruto's glare towards his fox partner did not recede until the fox broke into a small chuckle. Jokes aside, I sense something in her that feels familiar to me, much lesser of course, but familiar. Kurama's tail began to brush back and forth across Naruto's shoulders in vague interest. Naruto considered it high praise that Kurama would even begin to slightly equate an individual to himself. I like the one with Kushina's hair, Gyuki stated. Naruto focused on an armored woman with her hair drawn up into a ponytail. His pulse quickened slightly, which really should have been imperceptible to anyone. Looks like the kid likes her too. Kurama teased while prodding Naruto's cheek with his sinuous tail. A light blush took over his face as he avoided Kurama's gaze at all costs. Kurama continued to laugh at his expense while Gyuki regarded Naruto with a fondness an uncle would for his favorite nephew. I like that one. She looks fun. Do you think her blood is tasty? Shukaku mentally directed Naruto's gaze to one orange-haired girl in a skirt. Naruto almost panicked as he thought he saw her use Hiraishin to instantly move from side to side of a certain boy dressed in green. He sighed in relief when he realized she was just moving very fast. "Gaki, so help me, if you so much as talk to that girl I will eat her." Kurama grumbled. Shukaku started to berate the fox about a lack of taste in people when someone caught Naruto's eye. "That girl in the black and red, does it look like she is getting bullied by that white girl?" Naruto asked the three Biju. Kurama smirked and started to tease him again. "Kid, you should be more like me. You humans are so pathetic that I don't see color, you're all just the same. That girl is actually entirely white." Naruto chuckled at Kurama's realization. Her hair, her dress, her sheath, and her skin were entirely nothing but white. Upon closer inspection there was a collar to her jacket that was lined in red. 100 Ryo says she is an ice princess. Kurama gambled. "She does look incredibly haughty from here. These kids don't look like they've been taught proper respect for others." Gyuki groused unhappily. He may be the most agreeable of the present Biju, but even after his long partnership with B he was still rather strict where dignity was concerned. After a few moments more of what looked like a one-sided dressing down of the black and red girl, Naruto decided to get to his feet and jump down the building. He cautiously made sure to avoid cameras because he wasn't quite sure if jumping from buildings was normal or not yet. "Gaki, they've been here less than 5 minutes, are you already going to stick your nose where it doesn't belong?" Kurama agitatedly chided the spiky blonde that was now in brusque motion towards the pair of girls. "Can't just let some young kid get bullied, hits too close to home." Naruto thought solemnly. Kurama's teasing abated as he stretched himself while still across Naruto's shoulder. "Well, let's hurry up then, kid. It looks like the princess is waving around some of that dust stuff and red's about to blow." Naruto looked at the younger-looking girl and was confused when he didn't see any type of anger across her face. Things made a lot more sense when he realized the girl looked like she was about to sneeze due to the rainbow of dust floating around her. Reacting faster than his brain could process, he held out his right palm towards the cloud of dust and blinked. All of the dust particles quickly and carefully made their way into his hand, forming a small-sized ball. His action garnered the attention of both the girls as they looked to see where the dust had shot off to. The white girl gave him an impressive frown, whereas the red and black girl just eyed him nervously. He waved his free hand at the two girls and made his way over to them. The ball of dust remained equidistant from his now palm-up hand as he walked forward. "Hey there, the name's Naruto. Sorry to step in and bother you both, but you were getting dangerously close to exploding." Naruto introduced himself with a cheeky grin on his face. Much to his amazement, the white girl's frown got even deeper. "Explode? We were in no danger of anything happening until you came along and interfered. I hope you know how to properly handle that dust." The white girl scolded him. Naruto had to blink twice in hopes that the stupidity would go away and this would be revealed to be some form of joke he didn't get. After a momentary pause where no such luck ensued, he carefully pressed forward. "If you look really closely, you'll see that there is fire dust in this ball." Red here was about a moment away from sneezing, which would have likely ignited the first dust. Once the fire dust ignited, the rest of it was sure to go off afterwards. "I know we're new and all, but you should at least have studied some dust properties before attending Datbayo." As Naruto mentally punched himself for his ever-present verbiage, the white girl looked ready to assist in a more physical sense. "Do you not know who I am? I am Weiss Schnee, heiress to the Schnee Dust Company, and I will have you know I know far more about dust than you do." Weiss' voice was so annoying to Naruto he was having trouble focusing on anything. Until this moment he didn't think it was possible to hear a spoiled and privileged upbringing just by the sound of a voice. When he finally managed to work his way past that and examined what she was saying, he was hit with the realization. "It all makes sense," Naruto said so quietly the two girls had trouble hearing him. "All the times he called me that, this must have been what he felt like." Sure, he was nothing like the girl, but the sheer frustration at someone so obstinate must have been the same. "Who called you what?" Weiss seethed at the blonde boy. "Nothing you need to worry about, Dobi," Naruto said with a small smile across his face. "What did you just call me?" the girl inquired, her rage temporarily lessened by her curiosity. "Why don't you go look it up? I would hate to ruin the surprise." Naruto teased with a grin. A frustrated Weiss leveled him one last glare and then stormed off. Unsure of how to properly dispose of his dust ball, he looked around for a trash can. He quickly reconsidered his idea to put explosives in a public place and took out a storage scroll from a satchel on his side, depositing the dust ball into it. Wow, that's so cool. When he looked up, the black and red girl had quickly invaded his personal space and was on her tippy toes looking at his storage scroll. Naruto quickly closed the scroll and deposited it back in his satchel. The girl then looked up to him and spoke again. Your eyes look cool too. Is that part of your semblance? The girl's silver eyes looked into his own. Looking closely at them, he could almost make out the reflection of him's. Shit, Rinnegan. Naruto quickly chastised himself. He blinked his eyes and they turned back to their normal ocean blue. Time to talk my way out of this one. Yeah, kind of. Whenever I use that ability you just saw my eyes change. Not really sure why though. Naruto assured her with a blatant lie. Sorry if I interrupted anything. You just looked like you needed a hand with Dobby. The girl quickly raised her hands and shook them in denial. No. I totally needed a hand, lots of hands. I'm not the best at socializing and all. She nervously looked down at her feet as she twiddled one black boot into the ground embarrassedly. After a few seconds she apprehensively looked back to the blonde boy to see a warm and soothing smile. Don't worry about it. I spent most of my life traveling without talking to people. Even if you're not the best at socializing, I probably won't know enough to notice. He laughed in joking self-deprecation. Unable to deal with the girl's adorable happiness, without blushing slightly he coughed and pressed on. So like I said, my name is Naruto. Oh, my name is Ruby Rose. It's nice to meet you, Naruto. The girl beamed enthusiastically at him. Naruto chuckled at her energy and was about to say something when she quickly spit out. Can I see your weapon? She said it so quickly he had to try to figure out what she said. Right, the hunters here all tend to fight with a single weapon. Naruto remembered from his information gathering. He found it strange that they weren't versed in multiple tools like in the elemental nations, but learned to roll with it. Yeah, I fight mainly with kunai knives. You can use them like daggers and throw them. They are pretty cool. Naruto grabbed one from his satchel and spun it around before grabbing it and sinking to a combat stance. Ruby practically glowed at him. Oh my gosh, that is so cool. Exotic, yet simple and versatile. Do you want to hear about my weapon? Ruby asked with equal parts excitement and trepidation. Naruto laughed and realized that her zealousness towards her weapon must have gotten her into some awkward situations in the past. Hell yeah, show me what you got, Ruby, Naruto cheered her on. Responding to the enthusiasm, the shinobi showed, she reached behind her back and twirled her weapon as it deployed, slamming the bottom into the ground to show it off in its full glory. Naruto balked as the giant red weapon reminded him of a certain masochistic nutbag. Recovering quickly, he praised the weapon. That is pretty cool. Not many people know how to fight with a scythe. Now that is an exotic weapon. Naruto fixed her with a cheerful grin. Ruby blushed slightly and proceeded with an explanation. My uncle taught me how to use one. It is also a customizable high-impact sniper rifle. She bragged, clearly pleased with herself. So it's also a gun? Naruto supplied questioningly. Yup, she said with a loud pop on the P. The popping noise obviously disturbed Kurama from the nap he must have been taking, because he decided to open his mouth in a large yawn. Ruby realized that the thing draped across Naruto's shoulders was in fact an animal. She almost swooned at the sight of the beautiful orange fox. Is the fox your pet? Oh absolutely, Furball here is practical. He was cut off by Kurama clawing the side of his face, causing 3 bloody gashes to appear. Ruby let out a scared eep, and Naruto glowered at his fox companion. The gashes on his face healed within the next few seconds. Looking back to the concerned, scared Ruby, Naruto could only smile bashfully. He really doesn't like to be called a pet. Just think of him as my partner for both our sakes. Kurama snorted, obviously not content with the description. Thankfully he wasn't offended enough to claw his face again either. Naruto looked around and saw that nearly all of the students had already come and gone. He remembered hearing they were supposed to be attending some sort of entrance speech from what he had gathered before even making his way to Beacon. Come on Ruby, we're supposed to be heading to some fancy speech for the new students. Naruto grabbed her hand and lightly pulled her in tow towards the large congregation of energy he felt. Kurama observed the look of the girl in tow and saw her blushing furiously. He snickered from his position atop Naruto's shoulder. I take back what I said about this plan. Watching this kid bumble about social relationships with his obliviousness is going to be a blast. Kurama grinned evilly. Naruto stood in a large hall filled to the brim with kids. True to what he expected, even in Sage mode, he felt no one powerful enough he would deem a threat. The only exception to that rule was the gray-haired man in a green suit who was beginning to approach the standing microphone. Whereas everyone else's energy so low it was utterly non-threatening, that man had none at all. Regardless how intensely Naruto or the Biju focused their efforts on him, he remained a puzzle box that refused to open. Noticing that Weiss was gesturing at him while talking to Ruby and the blonde that Kurama had mentioned, he began to move towards them. Before he could even start the motion of a step though, Ozpin had begun speaking. I'll keep this brief. You have traveled here today in search of knowledge, to hone your craft and acquire new skills. And when you have finished, you plan to dedicate your life to the protection of the people. But I look amongst you, and all I see is wasted energy, in need of purpose, direction. You assume knowledge will free you of this, but your time at this school will prove that knowledge can only carry you so far. It is up to you to take the first step. In doing so, it is possible that every one of you might find your own heading, Ozpin stated. True to his word, his initiation speech was thankfully short. Even through his years, Naruto still held a disdain for authority figures droning at him for what seemed like eons. You'll gather in the ballroom tonight. Your initiation will begin in the morning. Be ready. You are dismissed. Glinda spoke into the microphone. Naruto was thinking of a way to either loosen up or prank her into a frenzy when his devious planning was interrupted. Naruto. Ruby called out to him to shake him from his thoughts. He looked over to the small girl and smiled. He approached the group of 3 girls with Kurama walking lazily by his side, clearly bored with napping. He approached Ruby and casually dropped his hand onto her hair to rustle it about. She scowled at him until she saw his giant smile. After that, she couldn't find it in herself to even be upset. Ah, does little Rubes have a boyfriend already? The blonde cooed at the red-cloaked girl. Ruby's face quickly lit up to match said cloak's hue before she turned and started banging her fists against the blonde's arm. Yang, Ruby groaned embarrassedly. She then turned to try to reintroduce Weiss to Naruto to find that the girl has already left and was nowhere to be seen. She turned back to Naruto to see that he had already started talking. If she does, it isn't me. We just met outside when the Dobi was giving her a hard time, Naruto corrected diplomatically. That was a misconception he had absolutely zero desire to see spread about. Yang raised her eyebrow in question and Ruby quickly added. He means Weiss. Ruby clued Yang in. She made an O with her mouth and then proceeded to walk towards Naruto. Name's Yang. Thanks for helping my little sis out. Maybe sometime we'll meet up and I'll have to reward you for it. She teased seductively with her right hand on his chest. She looked into his eyes to see him squirm, blush, panic, or any combination of the 3. What she did get was something she didn't expect, though. Naruto gave her a nonplussed grin and simply said, she seemed innocent and she was in trouble. There is nothing you need to thank me for. I just don't like seeing people get bullied. Yang blinked slowly, trying to process the innocuous reaction. She wasn't why or anything, she just knew she turned boys' heads. A is A. Gravity pulls things down and she was hot enough to make boys uncomfortable. Seeing a boy her own age defying the basic laws of Remnant put her thought process on halt. For a few seconds she just stood there looking into his eyes and seeing his smile. Yang, a much angrier Ruby yelled as she pounded her fists into her sister's back. The blonde awoke from her thoughts and pulled herself away from Naruto, who regarded the two with a confused expression. What is with these girls? Naruto thought to himself. Yuki wondered if he was really that dense. Shukaku was playing in the mindscape making sandcastles, and Kurama was silently laughing. Yang eyed him quickly before breaking back out into an unabashed grin. You're all right, Whiskers. I can tell the 3 of us are going to be friends, Yang stated. Yeah, Ruby enthusiastically supported. They both looked to Naruto again to see his cheery grin. Instead, all they saw was a look of great pain, an untold suffering beyond his years, and a palpable regret that nearly choked the air. They all descended into an awkward silence that felt like it spanned for minutes despite lasting only seconds. It would have gone on even longer if the fox by his side didn't nip at Naruto's hand, causing him to stir from his thoughts. When Naruto stirred from his memories, he saw the two girls looking at him in sadness. Yang seemed to be concerned about him, but more so he sensed a protectiveness of Ruby radiating from her. When he turned to look at Ruby, he saw an intense fear. He saw a little girl who was afraid to be left alone and the regret of thinking she had made a mistake. Naruto powered through his own mental torpor and gave them both a sad smile. "I'd love to try to be your friends," he said softly. Ruby's mood lightened considerably, but Yang continued to stare him down. A few awkward seconds passed before Ruby zipped up to him. "Don't you worry, Naruto. We're totally going to be friends. We'll be the best of friends. You talked to me about my weapon, you helped me with Weiss, and you seem super cool and nice. You're not going to regret this," Ruby said with a near fervent desperation. "Kami, I'm an idiot," Naruto thought sadly to himself, looking at the little girl who was trying so hard to make sure he didn't reject her. He took a deep breath and then broke out into a grin and rustled her hair again. "Don't you worry about a thing, Ruby. Just some personal stuff choked me up for a second there. You've got nothing to prove to me. Matter of fact, I already think you're pretty awesome." He gave her his trademark grin again, which she responded with in turn. Yang exhaled in the background and leveled a smile at Naruto. "Thank you," she mouthed to him. Naruto gave her a thumbs up with the hand that wasn't still rustling Ruby's hair, an action she surprisingly wasn't resisting, and then looked down to see Kurama pulling at his pant leg. "Oh right, ballroom. Let's get going, you two. I don't know if you've met Glinda yet, but I promise you do not want to be on her bad side." Naruto shivered, recalling the verbal lashing he had received at her hands. The girls both laughed at his reaction and they started to make their way towards the ballroom. Naruto sighed with a little mirth and tried to correct himself. "I can make a different life here. I just have to try." Naruto sat in the windowsill near the corner of the room. One leg laid straight on the sill itself while the other hung limply off the side. He plucked a sad song known as Wata, Harusame. Trapped within the melancholy of his own thoughts, he didn't even notice the pair amber eyes set on him that were also trapped in sweet remembrance. "I remember when mother used to play the shamisen. She would always play me the happiest of songs. I've never heard anything like this before," the black-haired beauty thought as she continued to stare at the blonde musician in complete unfettered reminiscence. Even as she was immersed by her memories, she couldn't help but realize just how alone the boy looked. She had seen him befriending the red and black girl that was being harassed by the Schnee heiress earlier in the day. She had intended to step in until he decided to save the day. She chuckled, remembering how he had called the Schnee idiot. He didn't just call her an idiot, he said it in such a way that he viewed it as her title or name. He didn't just view her as an idiot, she was the idiot. That alone was enough to give her a positive view of the spiky blonde-haired musician. What turned a positive inclination into a near fascination was what she saw after the headmaster's speech. The blonde strumpet came onto him fairly hard as, thanks for helping her sister. She had rolled her eyes at the time and expected him to gawk at her or throw out some boyish machismo. Instead, he looked at her like she was asking him a question in the most basic of rhetoric. "There is nothing you need to thank me for. I just don't like seeing people get bullied." In that moment she wondered if he would have done the same for her. Of course he would, she thought to herself. What she meant was if he would have done the same if she wasn't wearing her bow. A lifetime of persecution had almost fully converted her to misanthropy. She had seen humans treat each other with the noblest of chivalry and then seen those same people look down their nose at a faunus orphan as an animal to be put down. When everything started, she was a dreamer, hoping that humankind was just misled. After everything she had been through and everything she had sacrificed, she was no longer sure. "Ooh, Naruto's got an admirer," a saccharine voice called out in a sing-song tone. She instantly recognized it as the strumpet from earlier. The blonde musician lifted his head and looked at Blake. For a moment she bore the full brunt of an unspeakable melancholy. A pain that transcended the agony she felt. For even in her darkest moments she had been able to run from her pain, or try and fix what was causing her pain. When she looked into those pools of ocean blue, she saw a pain that had merely been accepted as part of living. A pain as devastating as her own that the musician must have just considered as much a part of him as his own breathtaking eyes. "Yang, if you keep thinking every girl that looks at me is an admirer, you're going to start giving me the wrong idea." The blonde chuckled as he picked up the case for his shamisen and zipped it away. The black-haired girl blushed and delivered upon the blonde strumpet her most withering of glares. Whether she didn't notice or didn't care was indiscernible as she sauntered towards the musician. She then rested her arm on his shoulder and her face on top of that. She stared eye to eye with him, less than a foot of space between their faces. "Who says it's the wrong idea, Foxy?" she purred. The musician blinked once and then rolled his eyes at her. He then seemingly looked at the fox who was sprawled across his bedroll for a few moments before he grinned and turned his gaze back to her. "You are flirting with me to see if I'm interested in Yang the person or Yang the woman," the musician stated flatly, causing the strumpet to almost physically reel backwards. He then leaned forward and whispered into her ear at a volume inaudible for anyone but the two blondes and the black-haired lady. "Well, it is undoubtedly both." His voice was seductive and playful, with the confidence of a man whispering the exact sweet nothings into the ear of a lady he knew she wanted. The strumpet started to blush fiercely until the musician gave her a cheeky grin and flicked her forehead to move her off his shoulder. After a few moments the strumpet recovered and gave the blonde a happy grin. "Oh Whiskers, Whiskers, Whiskers. You have no idea what you just started," she teased him back. The musician stuck out his tongue and the two of them shared a body laugh together. "Yang!" A grumpy voice of a young girl pierced through the laughter. The strumpet, who she now knew to be Yang, looked down at the girl in black and red with a grin. The young girl was looking up to Yang, giving her the most non-threatening of puppy dog glares. Yang reached down to mess up the young girl's hair, which only proceeded to make the glare given by the young girl even less intimidating than it already was. "Sorry about them. Ruby and Yang may be sisters, but they seem to go at it like cats and dogs," the musician explained as he sat next to the black-haired beauty. "My name is Naruto, by the way. Sorry for bothering you and all." He smiled sheepishly at her with his rubbing the back of his head embarrassedly. "Blake, I'm sorry for disturbing your performance. Well, I guess I'm sorry for incentivizing someone else in disturbing your performance, more accurately," she laughed quietly. Naruto gave a grin to her as bright and genuine as she had ever seen before. "Just try to ignore them and maybe they'll go away. I've been trying this whole time but it hasn't been working, here's to hoping though, right? Not on your life, Foxy. You don't get to just do that to an innocent little belle like myself and then shirk responsibility for it." Yang fake pouted at Naruto. In response the boy adjacent to her just facepalmed and looked to the ceiling. "Cammy, I wanted nothing but a peaceful school life. Why are you so insistent on throwing this powder keg of a woman into my path?" he mock cried to the gods. The two blondes shared a look and then started snickering at each other. After the mirth died down, Ruby started giving her sister a dressing down about flirting with all of her friends. Naruto leaned down to Blake's ear and quietly whispered a question that made her hair stand up on end. "So why hide behind the bow?" Blake started to go for her weapon but was almost immediately stopped as his arm wrapped around her entire torso, and with a truly impressive feat of strength, he spun her on her ass and quietly flicked both her weapons behind him, out of her reach. Blake was ready to engage in hand-to-hand when the boy raised both his hands open-palmed in the universal symbol of peace. "Sorry, didn't mean to startle you. I'm guessing it's a personal thing." He once again rubbed the back of his head in embarrassment. Not the best person at subtly moving through a conversation. "I probably could have done that better," he admitted. Taming her fight-or-flight instincts with sheer force of will, Blake was eventually able to respond to him. "How did you know that?" she hissed at him. "Oh, I have the ability to accurately sense aura, so I could sense your ears pretty clearly underneath your bow," he admitted casually. The way he paused before he said aura made it seem as if he was searching for the word. "Really, I was just asking out of curiosity. I have no intention of telling anyone your secret. Because at this point I am fairly certain it is a secret." With that reaction, he smiled apologetically. It seemed he truly did not mean to cause her any distress and was just trying to be friendly. Forcing herself to relax, Blake exhaled before taking a deep breath to calm herself down. "People tend to be very racist towards us, Faunus. They think our animal characteristics make us no different than animals. They think that just Beck." As she was about to begin her tirade, she was quickly interrupted by Naruto's grinning face. "Well, those people are stupid. No use thinking too much about it," he said in a "that's the" tone of voice. As if there was nothing more simple and obvious. Blake looked at his honest smile and fully relaxed herself. Regardless of her lack of trust, she knew that there was no one who could smile this genuinely and be lying. Thinking she may have met the nicest human she knew, a thought clicked in her head when she saw the whisker marks on his face and the fox in his bedroll. "Are you a fox, Faunus?" she whispered to him as quietly as possible. He looked confused for a moment but then waved off her question like it was laughable. "Nope, just a normal human. The furball and I go way back though, so any fox-like attributes of mine are probably just his bad influence." The fox in question popped one eye open and appeared to glare at Naruto before closing it once again. Something about the action struck Blake as bizarre. She pondered over it for a moment until a light bulb went off in her head. "Is your fox sentient?" she inquired quietly, not wanting anyone to hear her make the suggestion in case it was true. Naruto winced as if she had poked a wound of his. He glanced to the fox, who opened his eyes to look back. The fox rolled his eyes once and then closed them again. "Well, I unwittingly stole your secret. Guess it is only fair you get one of mine," the blonde rationalized jokingly. "Yeah, Kurama is as smart as you or I promise you if there weren't all these people around he'd tell you himself he was smarter." Naruto laughed as Kurama gave a slight nod of his head indicating that was indeed the case. Blake couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of the situation. Of course Naruto wouldn't think of her as anything but a person. His partner was a literal fox and he seemed to treat him as an equal. "Whiskers, I leave you alone for 2 minutes and you're already flirting with another girl. How could you take my innocence and then leave me like this?" Yang cried out from faux abandonment. Nothing else she had done had really gotten to Naruto, but saying loudly in a room full of people that he had taken her innocence seemed to do the trick. Naruto frantically waved his hands around and turned a bright red. Finally getting the reaction she had been looking for the entire day, Yang fist-pumped in victory, causing Naruto to scowl at her. "What are you reading?" the black and red girl she now knew as Ruby asked. Surprised by her interest, Blake reflexively answered. "It's called A Man with Two Souls. It is about a man who has two souls trapped inside him who are vying for control of his body. I love books. Yang used to read one to me every night before bed. Stories of heroes and monsters. They're part of the reason I want to be a huntress," Ruby explained softly, appearing to not want Yang to overhear her. "And why is that? Hoping that you can get a happily ever after?" Blake questioned with a small amount of derision. She had believed in a happily ever after before as well. "Well, I hope we all will. Isn't that what being a huntress is all about? Protecting the people and helping everyone get their own happily ever after?" Ruby questioned innocently. Blake gave her a small smile that one might give a child. "That's very ambitious of you, but unfortunately the real world doesn't always work out that way," Blake said quietly. "Then we change the world," a male voice declared in such a way you could almost hear the grin that he must have had when he said it. Sure enough, when Blake looked up from Ruby, she saw Naruto coming up with that stupid smile on his face. "You can't just change the world, Naruto. It isn't that simple," Blake said with a sad shake of her head. "Peeved. Like that could stop me. People spend their whole lives making up reasons not to go and get something done. Well, I only need one reason to go and get things done," Naruto declared absolutely. Blake looked at him disbelievingly. "And what's that?" she asked in a tone that was dripping with derision. "Simple. It is right or it isn't. I protect the good people, fight the bad people, and make sure all of my precious people are kept safe. That's just the way I am," Naruto stated just as confidently as before. He was not the slightest bit put out by the way she had treated him. In his mind he was just stating a fact, and that was that. Short, sweet, and to the point. "I like it, Foxy." Yang concurred loudly and thumped him on the back. The force knocked him forward slightly but didn't do anything to that bright smile of his. Blake was about to comment when a shrill voice came from behind the two blondes. "What is going on over here? Don't you realize some of us are trying to sleep?" the white-haired Schnee complained. Naruto turned to face her and within an instant they both yelled. "Not you again." Weiss glared at Naruto while he looked at her with nothing but a staggering sense of exhaustion. "What do you mean not me again? I still don't know what you called me, but when I figure it out I swear on my life that if it was an insult you are going to be." Blake snuffed out the light and decided to go to sleep. There was no way she was going to waste time listening to that. Naruto had roused himself from bed earlier than most everyone else. Although as a kid he had slept in almost chronically, life on the road had long since robbed him of such luxury. Having been constantly kept busy between visiting the Biju, keeping the peace and managing his own village at the tail end of things, there was rarely much time for long periods of rest. Kurama was lightly snoring from his shoulder as he headed down to the cafeteria. After fixing himself a substantial breakfast of primarily fruits and vegetables, he started to head to the locker room to find his locker. He didn't really think he'd have any use for it with his storage scrolls, but Yuki reminded him that it was important to keep up appearances. 5 minutes groping around aimlessly through the locker room was sufficient enough to annoy him. For some unbeknownst reason, these lockers were not in any sort of order, pattern or sensible formation that he could discern, even with the code-breaking training he had received from Ero-sensei. Eventually he heard a familiar, if not welcome, voice. However, this time it seemed so polite he was having trouble believing it. "Well, Pira, have you given any thought to whose team you would like to be on? I'm sure everyone must be eager to unite with such a strong, well-known individual such as yourself." The voice of Weiss rang out and drilled into Naruto's ears. That sickly sweet pleasantness felt so disingenuous based on every interaction he had observed from her thus far. "I honestly wasn't quite sure. I was just planning to let the chips fall where they may." The red-headed warrior spoke out. Naruto instantly recognized her as the one Yuki had pointed out on the first day and forcibly controlled every facet of bodily reaction to avoid another teasing from Kurama should he wake up. Deciding that he was clearly in need of help, he resolved to ask his fellow students for aid. He was most certainly not doing this to once again mess with Dobi. "Hey you two, any chance you've seen locker 558? I've been hunting around in this mess of lockers for long enough to having been bested by this school's absolutely abysmal organizational skills." Naruto bowed his head in mock defeat. The red-headed warrior giggled and Weiss looked positively murderous. Deciding the blonde nuisance was due for another dressing down, she started in on him. "Do you have the slightest inkling of who you are talking to?" Weiss questioned him scathingly. Naruto looked pensive for 5 seconds, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then, as if the answer had struck him like lightning, he perked up and started to speak. "Of course I know who you are, do. If you call me Dobi one more time I will skewer you." Weiss practically screamed at him. The prankster that still lived on in Naruto's heart wanted nothing more than for her to see just how comically poor that would go for her. Tempering his childish instinct, Naruto decided that for once he would de-escalate with Ice Queen. "Sorry, but I can't say that I do know your friend Weiss. Any chance you could introduce me?" Naruto apologized genuinely. He wasn't exactly the biggest fan of the way Weiss conducted herself, but rationalized that he should be the one to try to bury the hatchet given that he had 50-odd years on her. The admonishing line of questioning she took made him regret that adult decision within moments. "Pira Nikos? You don't know the Pira Nikos?" Weiss asked disbelievingly. "Can't say that I do," Naruto responded honestly. "Pira graduated top of her class at Sanctum," Weiss stated. "I'm going to hazard a guess that is a school?" Naruto hesitantly offered. "4-time winner of the Mistral Regional Tournament," Weiss declared, beginning to fire herself back up again. "Hey, that's pretty cool, Pira. We should spar sometime if you're up for it," Naruto offered. "For the love of, she is on the front of every Marshmallow Pete's Flakes box." Weiss could almost see the steam coming out of the head of the poor princess. Delving into his memories, he remembered one time many months ago he had tried the cereal. "Oh, I know what you're talking about. As cool as that is, I have to say that cereal was way too sweet for me. Couldn't even finish a bowl, let alone the box," Naruto admitted with a laugh. Pira gave him a happy smile. "That is perfectly fine. To be honest, the cereal isn't very healthy for you, so that is probably for the best," she admitted with a giggle of her own. Not liking the positive atmosphere between the two, Weiss thrust herself in between them and stared down the shinobi. "So after hearing all of that, do you really think she is someone that you should be bothering with your locker drivel?" Weiss asked, hoping to drive him into a corner. With each passing instant she spent with this dolt, she was becoming more and more aware that doing so was asking the impossible. "I'm not quite sure how all of that relates to why she would or wouldn't know where my locker is. You're gonna have to explain that to me again," Naruto said with an embarrassed laugh. Weiss resembled a volcano that had blown over, with her face turning as red as a tomato. Deciding to stop things before they escalated any further, Pira decided to interject. "I believe your locker is right here actually," she said, gesturing behind her and to the right. Naruto checked the paper and the locker number multiple times before falling to his knees. Kami, yes, my search is over. He cheered with relief. Pyrrha once again laughed at his antics, whereas Weiss was still experiencing a meltdown from the last set of perceived drivel. Having already risen from his knees, Naruto went to his locked and unlocked it, placing a few kunai in a pouch and then just tossing the pouch in the locker. Good enough, Naruto declared, slamming the locker shut. Well, it was a pleasure meeting you, Pyrrha. Best of luck out there. Seriously, let me know about that spar sometime. I want to know what a champion here has to offer. Without giving it a second thought, Naruto turned away and his sage cloak flourished. The black and red cloaked student walked towards the exit with his hands behind his head, looking as carefree as could be. As Pyrrha watched him walk away, she was struck with a simple thought. An impulse or instinct that anyone would recognize. That simple feeling that you had encountered something that you needed to have, something that you had spent your life searching for. With that simple thought, Pyrrha formed her resolve into one simple word. Mine. Pyrrha strode out to the cliffs of Beacon after it was announced the students should head there fully prepared. Her entire life she had trained as a warrior. She had trained herself into the ground day in and day out to become the best of the best. She sacrificed all of her time to become a warrior that could make her family proud. When she won her second Mistral regional tournament, she earned the title of Invincible Girl. After she had won it 4 consecutive times, that name changed to the Goddess of Victory. With each passing year, more and more people approached her. Whether it was to court her friendship, court her popularity, or in some cases court her, the number of people approaching her skyrocketed over the years. Despite that, she couldn't help but feel every proposal seemed so incredibly fake. Everyone who talked to her spoke of her accomplishments in the arena. Every person wanted some favor or something from her. By simply pushing herself to be the best, she had alienated herself from any meaningful relationships. She had always thought that there would be time for friendships after she accomplished her goals and that she just needed to devote herself to her training. Yet when the dust had settled and she had emerged the Goddess of Victory, there were no friendships to be had. That was the reason that despite her being Mistralian, she had decided to attend Beacon Academy in Vale. Here she hoped no one would know who she was and she could finally find the friendship she so desperately craved. Yet from the ride on the airship to her meetings in the lockers, she had encountered scores of people like Weiss who had sought to befriend her for either her battle prowess or fame. She was already starting to lose hope when a lovable blonde walked right up to her and asked her where his locker was. Even after being thoroughly interrogated by Weiss, it was clear Naruto had no idea who she was. Even after having her battle accomplishments thrown in his face, his only reaction was to ask to face her in combat. The exhilaration of someone who wanted to compete against her was a breath of fresh air, to say the least. The more she had won, the more dejected her opponents had become. By the time she had left Mistral Academy, most of her matches were ending in premature forfeiture. Someone wanting to test their mettle against her, as it were, was a welcome change of pace. He smiled, laughed, and joked with her like he just wanted to make friends with a stranger. That sort of relationship was exactly what Pyrrha set out from Mistral looking for, and she was hell-bent on making sure she managed to get Naruto as a partner. As she finally approached the cliffs where Professors Ostpin and Goodwitch waited, she saw her quarry. He was sitting there in front of a launch pad petting the fox she had seen across his shoulders previously, while a strange creature not even 2 feet tall dropped sand onto the launch pad in front of him. Where is it getting the sand from? Pyrrha wondered to herself. Watching the small brown creature waddle across the ground, she saw it go to a hole it must have dug. When it touched the ground with what she presumed to be its arms, the earth turned to sand. He then levitated it over to the launch pad before proceeding back to his hole to get some more. Shoo, that should be enough. You don't need to gather any more, Naruto explained. Pyrrha guessed by his tone of voice that this was by no means the first time he was explaining it, as the launch pad and surrounding grass was overflowing with sand. The strange creature didn't seem to listen though, as it deposited another pile of sand onto the launch pad. Naruto facepalmed and dragged his hand down his face exasperatedly. How about you make a sand castle while we wait, Shoo? Naruto suggested. The small creature practically bounced with glee until it gave up on waddling and quite literally rolled to the hole he had been digging at. Using whatever telekinetic powers it had over sand, it quickly began to assemble an impressive structure of sand much larger than it was. Pyrrha approached Naruto at where he was sitting and decided to reintroduce herself. Hello again, Naruto. Do you remember me from the lockers? Pyrrha asked with a smile on her face. Naruto eyed her quizzically. We just met less than 15 minutes ago. While we were introduced, Weiss made sure to tell me of your heroic feats. Pretty sure I remember you. Naruto teased the Spartan. Pyrrha gave an embarrassed laugh and sat down next to him. Sorry about that. Sometimes my exploits lead to people being a little too eager to praise me. To be honest, it can get a little exhausting. She confessed to the blonde as they both watched Shu's sand castle grow to being 5 feet tall and about 7 feet wide. Don't sweat it, Pierre. You've worked hard in your life and you got recognized by people. Can't exactly hold it against you when those same people go a little crazy over you. Naruto forgave her with a bit too much empathy to be coincidence. Pyrrha also noticed the nickname he gave her and found it only added to her mood. Did you ever have an experience like that? She asked Naruto. The second the question left her mouth, she already regretted saying it. The blonde's face went from his usual cheerful smile to the most disconsolate of frowns. His eyes glazed over as he appeared to be looking straight through the sandcastle into nothingness. Let's just say I knew someone who tried so hard to become everything they could be and all it did was drop them into an empty existence. If you don't mind, I'd rather not talk about it. Naruto grumbled lightly. Pyrrha was more than tactful enough to know she had stepped into sensitive territory. Before she could say anything more, she heard a sloughing of sand as part of the sandcastle was destroyed. The strange beast that had built the sandcastle was now rampaging through it like a monster and destroying the impressive structure from the top down. He jumped, turning himself into a cannonball to destroy a very intricately designed clock tower. Naruto chuckled beside her at his companion's antics. Pyrrha smiled to see his mood warm and was once again about to speak to him when Professor Goodwitch spoke. Students, please head to an available space. Anyone not in position within 2 minutes will be disqualified from the exam. Pyrrha grumbled something about bad timing and set herself off to the pad adjacent to Naruto's own. The small sand creature had waddled its way back to Naruto and had shrunk in size. It was now perched upon his shoulder while Naruto sat on the sand the creature had gathered with his fox in his lap. Looking more closely at the sand, she now noticed it was in a solid disc shape. After the 2 minutes had passed, Professor Ozpin addressed the formation of students. For years you have trained to become warriors, and today your abilities will be evaluated in the Emerald Forest. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard rumors about the assignment of teams, Professor Goodwitch added. Will allow us to put an end to your confusion. Each of you will be given teammates today. From her left she could hear the sound of a young girl whimpering. These teammates will be with you for the rest of your time here at Beacon. So it is in your best interest to be paired with someone with who you can work well. Ozpin advised. Once again Pyrrha heard the same girl whimper to her side. That being said, the first person you make eye contact with after landing will be your partner for the next 4 years. What? The previously whimpering girl screamed. Even further down the line Pyrrha heard someone say, I told you. It looked like Professor Ozpin was about to proceed when Naruto's hand shot up in the air. Professor Goodwitch regarded him coldly for a few moments. When that didn't encourage him to lower his hand, she sighed. Yes, Mr. Uzumaki? She prompted. Does that mean if we don't touch the ground we don't get a partner? Naruto asked. Goodwitch looked at him disbelievingly, whereas Ozpin seemed content to pass the buck on this one by burying his face in his cup of coffee. Are you implying that you can fly, Mr. Uzumaki? Professor Goodwitch asked him in such a way that it was clear that for his safety the answer better be, no. You know it. Naruto beamed at her confidently. Goodwitch looked to Ozpin and found the man conveniently looking away from her while taking the longest sip of coffee she had ever seen. Any of you who can fly will need to touch down in the forest and proceed on foot. Goodwitch stated firmly. Naruto threw his hands up in exasperation and fell flat on his disc, laying down. It was a particularly odd sight considering the entire procession of students was standing. After you have paired up, begin making your way to the northern end of the forest. You will encounter opposition along the way. Do not hesitate to destroy everything in your path, or you will die, Ozpin finished ominously. At least Pyrrha thought it would have been ominous if Naruto hadn't made a PFFT noise while his fox seemed to snicker on his lap. You will be monitored and graded for the duration of your initiation, but our instructors will not intervene. You will find an abandoned temple at the end of the path containing several relics. Each pair must choose one and return to the top of the cliff. We will regard that item as well as your standing and grade you appropriately. Are there any questions? Naruto started to sit up and raise his hand before Ozpin instantaneously said, "Good. Now take your positions." Naruto growled while his fox continued to snicker. One by one they were launched into the air until only Pyrrha and Naruto remained. Good luck, she warmly wished him before catapulting off, readying herself to find him when he made his descent to the forest. So Ozpin, I assume destroying the many cameras I'm sure you have scattered around down there would be considered a bad thing. Naruto assumed casually. His hands were still behind his head as he laid casually on his launch pad. Ozpin regarded him unflinchingly. I would prefer you avoid destroying or disabling them if at all possible, Mr. Uzumaki. Ozpin replied crisply. Naruto gave an overdramatic sigh and responded with an affirmative grunt. Goodwitch then activated his launch pad and watched as the boy was flung into the air with his bizarre animal companions. Sure enough, after the first 100 feet the boy floated completely still on his circular disc of sand. He then turned to face Ozpin, did a quick figure 8 and darted down to the forest. Glinda, I'm sure stating this is wholly unnecessary, but I would appreciate it if you kept a close eye on Mr. Uzumaki, Ozpin requested before taking another sip of coffee. I would have done so regardless of your request. I still don't know what exactly it is you see in him. He is one of the most childish students this year, Glinda bristled. She did not appreciate the careless attitude he appeared to be showing a test of such great magnitude. Truly? I thought he appeared mature beyond his years. After touching down to the ground, Naruto resealed Shukaku and started casually walking north with Kurama in tow. After a few minutes Naruto let out a sigh of relief. I'm glad to see your chakra still scares off the grim here. Ozpin seems suspicious of me as it is without me throwing around any more techniques, Naruto communicated mentally to Kurama. The funny thing about that kid is I agree with your idea to keep your powers under wraps. I was the one who encouraged you to let that geezer see as little of what we can do as possible. So why don't you explain to your old pal why it is you were so adamant about flying via Shukaku's sand? Kurama snarked at Naruto. To his credit, the fox's partner only rolled his eyes. I already informed him in the interview that I could channel all of your power. I figured that Sabaku Fuyu, desert suspension, was one of the most innocent techniques I can use. Hopefully the old man just writes Shu off at that. I used the diva path in the incident with Ruby and Dobby, and if Oz is as shrewd as I think he is, then I'm going to have to attribute that ability to you. Maybe I could convince him that you all provided me multiple powers, but from what I've seen from this world this is already a pretty tough sell. Naruto shrugged. It seemed like the best option, honestly. If he held back everything, Ozpin would just get more suspicious. Hopefully if he just seemed like the most powerful student in class, that would write off his aura score and get the old man to leave him well enough alone. Naruto boy, be aware. Something approaches us, Gyuki warned him. Mid-warning he had already reached into his satchel to grab a kunai and throw it towards the direction he originally came from. He waited to hear the kunai hit its mark, yet even after a few seconds passed there was no sign of the kunai hitting its mark or hitting the ground. That's strange, Gyuki pondered. A moment later a javelin came piercing through the air at an incredible speed surrounded by a black aura. A lifetime of living in the ninja world caused Naruto reflectively activated his Tendo. Shinra Tensai, Naruto shouted with an outstretched hand. The spear instantly stopped and fell harmlessly to the ground. Collecting himself he reached out to search for his attacker. Feeling the energy of the perpetrator, Naruto held out his hand towards their direction. Bansho Tenin, he said calmly. His jutsu immediately began acting on the perpetrator. His attacker attempted to ground themselves to resist his jutsu, so he increased its power. Finally his attacker flew through the air and into his outstretched hand. Naruto was ready to catch them by the neck until a familiar mane of red hair came into his vision. Reacting quickly he opened up his arms and safely caught the flying girl as she hurtled towards him. Embracing the now recognizable Spartan in an incredibly close hug, he blushed slightly and scratched his head with his free hand. "Hey there partner," he said lamely. Pyrrha had watched behind her as Naruto floated on the disc and did a figure 8, clearly goading their professors. She chuckled despite herself as she watched him speed down to the ground on his sandy perch. She took a deep breath and then prepared to land. Using a kuo to force her way through the lighter foliage, she found a sturdy branch and infused her arms with aura. Grabbing onto it, she swung nimbly from one branch to another until her momentum had slowed down enough that she felt comfortable rolling to the ground. She quickly stood up and changed Milo into its rifle form. After scanning the area a few times over, she sheathed her shield and weapon and started to run towards where she had seen Naruto sat down. Mere minutes later, she arrived upon his landing zone, the large pile of sand being a dead giveaway. Based on the way some of the sand was displaced, it looked like Naruto had managed to find the correct direction and was headed towards the relics. Pyrrha took off like a bolt to find her would-be partner. She felt like she was quickly gaining ground on him until she was struck by a thought that somehow hadn't crossed her mind. I'm basically hunting him. Eep. What will he say if he sees me running towards him like I was desperately tracking him down? I mean, I am trying to track him down, but not desperately. I just want to find someone to be my first true friend at Beacon, and he seemed like a nice bet. There is nothing weird about pursuing friendship, right? I'm just a perfectly normal, ordinary girl doing ordinary things to make friends. There is nothing even remotely strange about this. The Spartan continued to try to convince herself of this as she meandered forward. She would have continued to aimlessly move forward, lost in thought, if a low whistling noise didn't jolt her from her thoughts. Her training kicked in and she recognized it as an incoming projectile. Hoping some part of it was metal, she reached out with her semblance and attempted to freeze the object in place. When she saw the kunai, she recognized it as Naruto's and decided to have a little bit of fun. You wanted to challenge me eventually, right? Let's see how you handle this. Changing Milo into its javelin form, she tagged it with her semblance to jettison it forward at a high speed. Based on the trajectory and angle the knife flew in at, she was pretty sure it would reach Naruto and pin him to the ground or a tree harmlessly through his cloak. Shinra Tensei, she heard him shout. Suddenly her control of her semblance was completely overpowered and she heard Milo clatter harmlessly to the ground. She was shell-shocked that his semblance was somehow more powerful than hers or could somehow negate her own. Her trained ears made out that Naruto had said something, even if she couldn't distinguish what. Immediately after, she felt a powerful force pulling her entire body in his direction. She dug a kuo into the ground to anchor herself in place while she tried to figure out what was happening. Is his semblance the ability to copy semblances? No, this doesn't feel like my semblance. My entire body is being pulled towards him, not just my armor. How powerful is he? She grit her teeth as the force on a kuo threatened to dig it out of the ground. As her mind raced trying to find a method to victory, the force exerted on her body increased substantially. Her shield dislodged itself from the ground and she went careening through the air towards the direction she knew Naruto was. As she flew completely upright down the path, her eyes eventually caught Naruto's and he seemed to panic. Opening up his not outstretched arm, he watched as she rapidly approached through the air. A moment later, he lowered his outstretched hand as she was nearly upon him and she felt the force of his semblance leave her body. Inertia carried her the rest of the way into the blonde's powerful embrace. After using his body to brace her impact, he sighed and quickly moved a hand to scratch the back of his head in embarrassment. From the comfort of his arm, she looked up to the blonde student and gave her the exact thing she wanted. "Hey there, partner," he said, and she thought it was one of the coolest lines she had ever been given. Pyrrha and Naruto walked side by side through the forest as Kurama sat on his usual perch. While heading towards the direction Professor Ozpin had told them they could find the relics, Pyrrha was taking the chance to learn about her newly made partner. "So Naruto?" Pyrrha questioned. "What's up, Pyrrha? Earlier when you stopped my javelin, was that your semblance?" Pyrrha queried her partner. Naruto gave an internal sigh of relief. He was glad he had thought ahead with a prepared answer. "Kind of. My semblance is more like a contractor of guardian spirits. Kurama here primarily gives me access to what my clan knew as the Tendo. In this language they also referred to it as the Diva Path, or God Realm. It gives me control over polarity of any object that I wish, with myself as the origin. Well, kind of anyways. I can move an object up or down as long as it is closer to me if I'm using Bansho Tenin or further away from me if I'm using Shinra Tensei." Naruto explained as concisely as he could. Pyrrha's jaw almost dropped to the forest floor. "You control polarity? You got it. And just to make sure I wasn't imagining it, you said that you could use this Tendo on anything?" "Absolutely anything. That was supposed to be my thing." Pyrrha complained quietly and kicked some dirt in frustration. When she came to Beacon Academy, she had always hoped to find someone strong enough to challenge her. That didn't change the fact that seeing someone have a semblance that was so similar and yet more universal than her own miffed her competitive spirit. A thought crossed her mind and she decided it couldn't hurt knowing more about her mysterious partner. It seemed like when you deflected Milo you were the epicenter of your semblance. Is that the restriction for its power? She asked, trying to find some way in which her own was superior. Normally, yeah. Pyrrha's face brightened. She could freely control metal, suspending it in air or causing it to change directions. Naruto's technique seemed restricted to his person. I win, she thought to herself. I do have one technique with Tendo that pulls it everything towards a little ball I create, but I never use that one. Naruto admitted timidly. Pyrrha eyed him inquisitively. Is it too weak to use in combat? She inquired. Naruto grimaced for a moment before giving his reply. It is definitely not something I'd have any use for here, he non-answered. Pyrrha decided she would let it go as he clearly didn't want to talk about it. He is probably just embarrassed that his external technique is weaker. With how powerful his semblance seems to be, he probably just doesn't have control the more refined aspect of it. She rationalized to herself. What about you, Pyrrha? What does your semblance do? Naruto asked cheerily, bringing Pyrrha back to the conversation. I also control polarity, but my semblance only has domain over metal. Most everyone fights with metal of some sort though, so I have learned to use it in great effect in combat. Pyrrha preened to herself. She internally remarked that it was funny how at odds with herself she was. She had come to Beacon with the intent of finding a normal friendship, but now that she had the chance at one, she couldn't quell her competitive instincts. Naruto raised one hand to his mouth and let out a gasp. Only metal? Don't worry, Pyrrha, I'm sure if you eat your marshmallow Pete's flakes you'll grow up big and strong like me. Naruto teased the red-headed girl. She giggled and punched him in the shoulder. Jerk, she teased back. Strangely enough, afterwards she saw his face change from a playful grin to abject horror. Before she could get worried, it changed back to his normal grinning face. Don't tell me I'm the Teme of this world. Naruto thought to himself, utterly terrified of the implications. He spent the rest of the walk towards the clearing engaging Pyrrha in idle conversation while attempting to convince himself that he was not even the slightest bit like Sasuke as a teenager. Eventually they made their way to a clearing. They were greeted by the sight of an old ruin and two familiar faces. Foxy, I see you've found your partner already. A familiar blonde voice boomed at him. Surely enough, Yang stood next to Blake with her hands behind her head and chest thrust forward. I beat you here, of course. Don't tell me you're a slow starter, Whiskers. She teased Naruto, who only deemed to respond with a roll of his eyes, choosing to grasp onto the first statement as a point of conversation. Don't know how much I found my partner. She kind of snuck up on me and tried to impale me with her spear. Seeing Yang's playfully waggling eyebrows, Naruto instantly smacked himself. No, Yang, not like that. Kami, I know a few people you'd get along with just fine, Naruto grumbled to himself. Pyrrha was about to defend herself, saying that Naruto attacked her first, but she was confused what Naruto meant by not like that, and why Yang seemed to find it worth teasing him for. Cool to see you again, Blake. Naruto interrupted Pyrrha's thoughts and beamed at the black-haired girl. I'm just happy we made it through without incident. Besides fighting a few Beowulfs and Ursa, the walk here was relatively tame. She confessed honestly. Pyrrha remarked to herself how odd it was that they didn't encounter a single Grim on their entire trek through the forest. I didn't even break a sweat. Yang bragged, stretching her arms out. Naruto chuckled at Yang's bravado. He tensed up as he saw Kurama's ears flick from his perch. Something is coming, Naruto said ominously as he drew a kunai from his satchel. Pyrrha unsheathed Milo and readied a kuo. Yang punched her right hand into her left palm and Blake readied her katana. The three of them then followed Naruto's gaze to the sky and saw a giant Nevermore flying over them. Pyrrha squinted closely and saw what looked like a white figure along with a similarly sized black, red one grabbing onto the Nevermore. Suddenly the black and red figure fell from the bird straight towards them. Heads UUUUUUUP. The mass of color cried out. As it fell closer and closer to the ground, Pyrrha was able to discern a person's form. She then saw Naruto casually walk a few feet forward and then stood in place with his arms outstretched. A few seconds later the person plopped straight into his arms in a bridal carry as he bent his knees to reduce the impact. I can already tell that you are going to be a trouble magnet short stack. Naruto sighed as he set the now identifiable girl down. After a brief moment of getting over the shock, she positively glowered at him. I am not short, she cried at him. I am still growing. I drink milk. I'll show you. She continued to splutter angry, fragmented sentences at him concerning her height. Did your sister just fall from the sky? Blake asked Yang in confusion. Yang started before the sound of a roaring beast brought all their eyes back to the nearby forest. A giant Ursa appeared and started knocking down tree after tree. As soon as it completely cleared the tree line, it started flailing about. Yeehaw! A feminine voice whooped as a large blast of sparks appeared from behind the Ursa. She then cartwheeled over the Ursa's back as it fell to the ground and landed to look at the deceased creature. Her pink skirt and orange hair made the situation all the more comical. Ah, it's broken, she whined. Nora, please, don't ever do that again. A black-haired boy with a pink highlight demanded exhaustedly next to her. The girl then sprinted over to where the relics were placed on their pedestals and grabbed a golden rook without hesitation. Singing a song about being queen of the castle, she basically skipped back to the boy she had entered with. Did that girl just ride in on an Ursa? Blake once again asked Yang. And for the second time Yang was interrupted by some loud noise that sounded like a growl crossed with a shriek. Another Grim came barreling through the forest, knocking down trees as it went. What appeared was a giant Deathstalker. The large scorpion claws flexed as its jaw chittered while the golden stinger attached to its tail loomed menacingly. Did a Deathstalker really just manage to find us in the middle of the forest? Blake asked Yang for the third time. Yang began to growl furiously as her eyes turned red. I can't take it anymore. Could everyone just chill out for 2 seconds before something crazy happens again? Yang's bright red eyes only accentuated her palpable anger. The universe gave her a comedic 3 seconds of peace before the Nevermore dropped Weiss out of the sky. Her power is tied to rage. I knew there was a reason I like her. Kurama mused to himself. Naruto sighed as he felt the Nevermore circle back around on their group. On a serious note, where did this Deathstalker come from, Furball? I could swear they are one of the more powerful Grim. Why didn't your chakra scare it off like the others? Naruto asked his fox companion. Kurama contemplated for a moment before he brought his paw to hit his face in frustration. Gaki, you're an idiot. The little bit of chakra I was letting off to scare the Grim might have worked on the weaklings, but it is essentially an intense miasma of hate and negativity. Now what did we learn Grim were attracted to? Now it was Naruto's turn to hit himself in the face. Right, attracted to negativity. Concentrated hate definitely qualifies as negativity. So the lesser Grim were scared of it, but the greater Grim are looking at your chakra as a tasty meal. Naruto sighed. He had spent the better part of a year gathering information about this place, and as he watched Weiss get dangerously close to hitting the grassy plain they were on, he berated himself for his carelessness. He lazily held out his arm and Weiss went from a dead fall to shooting at him like a rocket. Similar to how he did with Pyrrha, he stopped his Tendo right as she reached him. He cushioned her crash with his body, leaning back and using his chakra to cement his feet to the ground as he attempted to soften the impact as much as possible. After that was finished, he set her down and grinned at her. Weiss of you to drop by, he teased. There were a few seconds of silence before the collective party groaned save Yang. She looked at him with the shock someone might look at a great tragedy. It looked like her life was passing before her eyes. Breaking herself from the hell that was her mind, she absolutely bellowed at Naruto. There is no way you made the first pun. Yang was absolutely furious. There was no justice in a world where she did not get to make the first pun, it seemed. Blake rolled her eyes at her partner's attitude. Well, now that we've gathered everyone here, I suppose it is time to die together? Blake joked sardonically. Yang's eyebrow twitched as it looked like she was about to erupt. That was the joke she was going to make. Oi you lot, get it together. Naruto shouted to all of them. Gone was the face of the cheerful goof most all of them had known. Taking its place was a commander ready to lead his troops. Pyrrha, Castle Queen, broody boy, you're with me. He commanded the group. The orange-haired girl stood ramrod straight and saluted. She then marched behind Naruto waiting for him to lead. The broody boy regarded him with an arched eyebrow but fell in line as well. Ruby, Yang, Blake, and Dobie, I want you to take care of the giant scorpion. Follow whatever chain of command you feel fits best, but be safe and work together. Dobie, I can already tell you have issues with following people's orders, but you need to swallow your pride and do your damn job. Whereas one might expect Weiss to look at him with her all too familiar anger, at that moment she merely looked cowed. Once we finish the Nevermore, we'll help you with the Deathstalker if you can't handle it. Naruto brusquely turned after saying everything he needed to and started jogging away from the Deathstalker to give the other team space. Remembering something, he looked to the fox on his shoulder. It appeared to grumble and then nodded as it jumped off its perch, made its way over to the group of girls. Are you sending Kurama with us? Can you do that? Blake asked Naruto curiously as the fox continued to slowly plod its way over to them. You know it. As long as Kurama is out and about, he can share his power with me over a pretty long distance. Naruto spied her expression and immediately started downplaying. I mean, it has its limits, of course. It should be fine here though. Hey Foxy. Yang interrupted, closing the discussion. Don't you worry about that big bird. When we finish first, we'll make sure to bail you out. Yang challenged him. Naruto laughed at the known impossibility of that statement. You beat that oversized scorpion first and I'll make you dinner sometime, Yang. Naruto laughed out again. Yang's eyes widened and then narrowed in glee. You're on, she exclaimed, punching her fist into her palm. Broody boy, take this. Naruto reached into his satchel and pulled out a spool of ninja wire. The boy eyed it with clear recognition and deposited it in his jacket pocket. Ren, and you? He corrected and then asked. Clearly he was not one to waste time on unnecessary words. Naruto. Pira, you're with Ren. I'm going to drag that thing down to that arch over there. Naruto gestured to a decrepit stone arch that looked like it had seen better days. Ren arched his eyebrow at Naruto. Understanding the implied question, Naruto responded. Don't worry about how I'm going to get it down, I won't have a problem. The problem I do have is that I can't keep it stuck down here forever. Naruto lied. In reality, he thought flexing this much power would be enough to satisfy Ozpin's curiosity. A student who could pull a Nevermore out of flight for even mere moments would be a powerful. On the other hand, a student who could permanently ground a Nevermore with such little effort that he could simultaneously play a game of shogi would probably get him locked in a testing facility, or at least, they would futilely attempt to put him there. Got it. Ren responded briefly. Naruto then turned to face the orange-haired girl. She stood perfectly at the ready, regarding him as if he was her commander. Once those two have it secured, they won't be able to do much else other than keep it there. I'm going to need you to finish it off. Can you handle the castle queen? Naruto asked her. The girl let her lips curl into a bestial grin and pulled out some sort of very large gun from her back. She then proceeded to press a button that turned it into a giant metal hammer. Naruto shot her a grin. Her name is Nor. Ren tried to inform their apparent leader before a pink-gloved hand shot out to cover his mouth. Naruto eyed them in confusion but eventually spun to face their flying foe. All right, Team Nevermore, let's give 'em hell. Hoo-ah! Castle Queen shouted. She felt imbued with energy from their commander's battle speech. Naruto then held out his right hand towards the Nevermore. Ren's acute sense of aura made him gasp as he saw the intense amount of energy that began to surface through Naruto's body. Bansho Tenin, Naruto intoned loudly. Recognizing the language that he spoke as he got into position, Ren couldn't help but scoff slightly. Heavenly attraction of all creation? What a pretentious name, he thought to himself. Yet despite his contempt, he was amazed at the apparent power of the technique when the Nevermore dropped from the sky like a stone. A second of plummeting later, its head smashed through the stone arch Naruto had positioned them at. Bricks and dust exploded down as Ren shielded his eyes. Anytime now, guys. Can't do this forever. Naruto panted loudly a fair distance away from him. Ren nodded to Pira, and she grabbed the spool while Ren wrapped the wire around his hand a few times to secure a grip. The Spartan leapt onto the back of the Nevermore and ran across its midsection. She nimbly jumped to the other side of the Nevermore and pulled the wire as hard as she could. The Nevermore let out a screech as the ninja wire dug into its flesh. A moment later, Ren could tell Naruto had released his semblance as the Nevermore bucked backwards, almost yanking him off the ground. Nora, now! Ren yelled as the ninja wire dug into his own hand. Nevermore pancake coming up, Nora yelled as she jumped high into the air. With a devilish grin, she then started to fall. Upon reaching the Nevermore in a blur of pink and orange, she slammed her hammer into its head, trapped in between the two stone pillars that remained of the arch that once was. With such destructive force applied to it, and such little the Nevermore could do about it, its head was flattened completely. It twitched violently once and then its entire body went slack as it started to fade away. "Way to take it to him, Team Nevermore." Naruto praised the group with a grin. He was still breathing heavily, but it looked like he must have recovered from using his semblance. Nora changed her hammer back into its gun form and then rushed over to Naruto, positively glowing. "Oh my gosh, that was so much fun. That plan was amazing, Commander." Nora praised what in her mind was now her fearless leader. "Your semblance was so cool. You just held your hand out and shouted some gibberish and then the Nevermore just vroom splat onto the ground." Naruto balked at the girl's energy level as she visibly vibrated in front of him. He said, "Bansho Tenin, it means heavenly attraction of all creation." Ren politely informed his friend while putting a hand on her shoulder to stifle her vibrations. Nora's excitement could not be contained as she merely caused the offending limb to vibrate along with her. Pyrrha looked surprised at the rather grandiose name of the skill. She had figured Naruto wasn't exactly one for such things. "What does the name of the other technique you used earlier in the forest mean?" Pyrrha asked Naruto. Naruto bashfully looked away, seeming embarrassed. "What did he say?" Ren asked Pyrrha curiously. "I think he said something like, Shina Tensei," Pyrrha supplied with an unsure tone. Ren snickered once, which caused Naruto to glower at him. "I'm guessing he probably said, Shinra Tensei. I'm guessing that was some kind of repulsion ability?" Ren ventured. Pyrrha nodded her head excitedly. "How did you know?" she asked. Naruto groaned in embarrassment behind her. "It's in the name," Ren admitted. "It means heavenly subjugation of the omnipotent god." Pyrrha giggled and looked to a Naruto who clearly would rather have been anywhere else at this moment. "Look, I didn't name it, okay?" Naruto complained as his face fell into a childish pout. The remaining three all laughed at him. Ren gave a short three-syllable chuckle, Pyrrha continued to giggle, and Nora let out an earth-shaking belly laugh. Naruto grumbled something about kids these days and then closed his eyes. A few seconds later he addressed the three of them. "Looks like the others are having a little bit of problem with the Deathstalker. Kurama says they definitely have enough power to take it down but aren't cooperating at all." Seeing the expression, Ren once again regarded him with Naruto proceeded to explain. "Kurama is the fox, his aura is connected to mine. That is what allows me to communicate with him and share his power despite the distance." Naruto explained. Ren gave a singular nod accepting the explanation. "Well, let's get a move on. We gotta go help them out," Nora declared as she started wandering in the direction they had originally come from. Naruto put a firm hand on her shoulder, stopping her from moving any further forwards. "First off, they dragged the Deathstalker over there." He pointed about 30 degrees to the right of where Nora was headed. "Secondly, we're not going to interfere. This is their test to overcome. If we take this challenge from them, they'll be nothing but worse off for it," Naruto declared stonily. Ren eyed him with a frown. "Are you suggesting we just leave them to their fate?" he asked pointedly. Naruto shook his head in response. "We're going to go there to assist if necessary, but unless it becomes life or death, we're leaving this to them. Fighting their battles for them won't make them any stronger." Ren's expression softened and he nodded his head in understanding. Naruto wasn't being cruel. He just knew the dangers they would face and understood each and every one of them had to get stronger. "Lead on, fearless leader," Nora shouted. Naruto gave them all a once-over with his eyes to make sure everyone was in agreement. Once he saw the affirmation in everyone's eyes, he started running towards the next fight. "Try to keep up," he jeered over his shoulder as his foot hit the ground and he basically leapt across the earth. Pyrrha, Ren and Nora were all competitive enough that the taunt worked and started sprinting after him. As Naruto led his temporary team away towards the Nevermore, Ruby turned to face the Deathstalker that was almost upon them. "I got this," she declared and charged the Deathstalker head-on. Using her semblance, she sped towards it faster than the eye could see, leaving a trail of rose petals in her wake. Using her momentum, she swung her scythe overhead straight into the carapace of the Deathstalker. Her weapon penetrated less than half an inch into the carapace before the Deathstalker used its claw to bash Ruby off of it. "Ruby!" Yang yelled. Her semblance flared with rage as she rushed in to protect her sister. firing shot after shot from her gauntlet as she attempted to distract the scorpion from her downed sister. The Deathstalker identified her as the threat and started to engage the blonde brawler. Yang was powerful, and was able to go blow for blow with the beast as she bashed aside its mighty pincers with the force of her punches. Sisterly instincts overpowering her, she looked towards Ruby as she punched the Deathstalker's claw away. Ruby appeared to be getting up, which caused Yang no end of relief. Her momentary distraction cost her as the scorpion's tail bashed her into her sister. "Why, you immature child?" Weiss criticized Ruby as she caught up. "What did you expect to be able to do by yourself? You can't just fly off the handle like that." "Hey, stop talking to Ruby like that." Yang defended her sister as her overprotectiveness peaked. "We don't have time for this." Blake hissed as she too arrived at where the group was, only to have to jump out of the way as the Deathstalker attacked them. Yang instinctively grabbed Ruby in her arms as she jumped away. "I'm okay, Yang. It just got me by surprise," Ruby said, pulling out of her sister's arms and steadying herself. Yang reluctantly let her go and would have given her a dressing down if she hadn't criticized Weiss for doing much the same. "We need a plan to try and take this brood down," Weiss shouted as she repeatedly backstepped each blow of the beast as it had fully focused its attention on her. "Let's just all attack it at once," Yang yelled as she jumped in there. Ruby followed her hot on her heels and Blake reluctantly joined. Off to the side, perched in a tree, Kurama sighed. "This is pathetic. This creature is so weak that any two of them could beat it with the slightest bit of effort. The least these weaklings could do is band together to be something less pathetic." Kurama grumbled. These kids were supposed to be at least 17. He had guessed the Ruby girl was younger than that. That notwithstanding, the Gaki had fought and defeated Kaguya by the time he was 17. Seeing such pathetic humans made him physically ill. A minute or so passed in such a fashion before he heard Naruto's thoughts wash into his head. "How is it going, Kurama?" Naruto asked through his mind. "Gaki, I may have to stop calling you kid. After watching a fight this pathetic, I'm beginning to remember how grateful I am I'm not going to need another Jinchuriki." Kurama complained caustically. "Ouch." Naruto winced. "If they are bad enough that you are complimenting me, it must be bad. We'll bring our team over immediately to see what's going on." Kurama grunted as Naruto retreated to his own mind. When they were closer to each other, it was basically impossible not to hear the other's thoughts. This distance, however, granted them some modicum of privacy. It had been some time since Kurama had ventured far enough away from Naruto to be inside his own head alone. He continued to watch the girls fight with all the grace and coordination of a drunken toad. As utterly bored as he was with the fight, he became alert when the white girl tripped over a mound of dirt that had been created in their scuffle. The Deathstalker's tail shot forward at the speed of lightning and Kurama knew the kid wouldn't be able to dodge. "Bah!" he mentally exclaimed. The creature was too close to striking her for him to defend her unsuspiciously, so he used the only tool he hoped that stupid old man wouldn't see. Kurama's pure malefic chakra hit the Deathstalker and caused it to freeze just long enough for the white girl to regain her bearings and roll out of the way. The catgirl turned to where Kurama was facing with a primal fear in her eyes. "That one is part animal. She instinctively fears me as the apex predator when I let my fangs out. I'll have to prepare an excuse for Gaki to use if she confronts him." Shortly after that, Naruto showed up looking as fresh as he had started the day. Behind him, his team was a heaving mess of sharp breaths and gasps. Kurama chuckled at the thoughts of a normal human trying to keep up with a shinobi. He was surprised to see the Gaki use Banshog Tenin to grab the small girl and pull her towards him. The rest of the group looked to see Ruby held firmly in Naruto's grip. "Team Nevermore," Naruto's voice commanded his group. "Distract the Grim while I talk with Team Deathstalker. Engage it, but use only delaying tactics. I don't want you or it hurt." The three nodded in understanding and set out to engage the scorpion. "You three, over here," Naruto commanded to the remaining three girls. "I'm not letting them fight on their own whiskers." Yang snarled at Naruto as she turned to re-engage the beast. Moments later, she was pulled back by an incredibly powerful force as she too flew to Naruto. Once she arrived, he grabbed her by the scruff of her jacket, similar to Ruby. However, unlike Ruby, who didn't struggle in his grip, Yang fought tooth and nail to release herself. Naruto sighed and then opened his fist as she fell to her knees. Immediately she tried to get up but found an intense and persistent force trying to slam her into the ground. It took all of her strength just to kneel. "Can you two come over here on your own?" Naruto addressed the flabbergasted Blake and Weiss. "I'm out of hands to pull people over with." As if to exemplify that point, he lifted Ruby slightly off the ground. The two girls quickly came over to him. "What are you doing?" Weiss demanded to know of him. He was basically attacking his fellow students. "First things first," he said and closed his hand. The pressure that had been weighing Yang down was released and she was finally able to rise to her feet. She was a bit shaky yet still managed to fix Naruto with an enraged glare. "What the hell, Naruto?" Yang exploded on him, actually using his name for once to express her seriousness. Naruto dropped Ruby as she too turned to face him. "Honestly, I'm trying to help you guys out. We're all friends here and you weren't getting anywhere with that thing," Naruto stated simply. Calling Weiss a friend was a bit of a stretch, but everyone reluctantly agreed to their lack of progress on the beast. "So for now we're going to do a neat training exercise they taught me back where I came from. He pointed to Ruby. "You aren't fighting that thing." To describe Ruby as crestfallen would be a vast understatement. "We couldn't even beat it all together. How will they be able to do it without me?" Ruby complained. Part of her seemed to be upset that she wouldn't get to show her fighting prowess, but the other part was scared for the other three. "Simple, you're going to be commanding them in battle." Naruto explained like it was the most logical thing. He then turned to face the other three. "And you three will not do so much as breathe on it unless she tells you what to do. You can do nothing but avoid it unless she explicitly tells you otherwise." Sensing an argument coming from all three of them, he proceeded to threaten them. "Kami, help me if you do anything, but I will blast that thing into the sky and you'll lose your chance to impress anyone. All the professors will see is how you four ran around like chickens with their heads cut off and then got saved by a superior team." The four girls stared at him with varying looks. Blake didn't seem to like being ordered around, but she ultimately understood the logic of his words. Ruby seemed nervous, but that was most likely because she had no experience leading others into battle. Yang looked like she might just try to punch him in the face and be done with it there. Weiss looked at him with an expression borderlining hate for basically holding her test grade above her head. Naruto worried something might break until he heard Ruby take a deep breath and start to speak. "We can do this, guys. Naruto is right. We weren't getting anywhere because we weren't fighting like a team. One group of three is going to be way stronger than four groups of one. We can do this," Ruby reiterated firmly. The three girls looked at her and nodded their heads. Weiss then walked up face to face with Ruby and stared her down. "You are so childish and dim-witted and hyperactive. Don't even get me started on your reckless fighting style." She insulted the young girl. Naruto gave her a look that told her to get on with it. He knew this was going to lead to her attempt at reconciliation. "But I know that I can be a bit difficult. For the time being I'll follow your lead so we can beat this monster," she concluded. Ruby's face started to light up in happiness. "But only this once," Weiss declared firmly. Naruto sighed, but supposed that would have to do. "We got your back, Ruby. You can do this," Yang encouraged her younger sister. Naruto smiled at her and Yang gave an embarrassed one back. "You guys have 1 minute to plan before I call my team off. Show me what you can do. Team Nevermore, back off and leave this to the girls," Naruto shouted over the din of fighting. They all immediately backed off and headed to where Naruto and the other four girls stood. "Alright ladies, show me your stuff." Naruto cheered them on. Yang, Weiss and Blake all shot off like lightning. Blake going left, Weiss going right and Yang taking the Deathstalker head on. Yang immediately resumed the same style of fist-meet-claw brawling that she had previously with the Deathstalker. The difference this time was that Weiss and Blake both circled around the Deathstalker. Blake jumped from her position onto the Deathstalker's back. The creature immediately tried to impale her with its powerful stinger, but Blake narrowly dodged, letting it pass over her shoulder. "Weiss, boost glyph," Ruby shouted. Blake jumped into the air as Weiss created a glyph that sent the black-haired beauty straight into the segmented section below its stinger. Using the ribbon attached to Gamble's shroud along with the inertia from Weiss' glyph, she pulled the stinger itself down to the ground. "Freeze it," Ruby shouted from her position next to Naruto. Weiss twisted the dust cylinder in her rapier to its ice dust chamber. Pointing it at the immobilized stinger, she thoroughly froze it to anchor it to the ground. "Keep it still, Yang," was Ruby's next command. Yang intercepted each of the incoming claws with her hands and grabbed onto them. Using all of her strength she managed to keep the Deathstalker still. I can't do this for long. Yang screamed with the intense exertion of her task apparent across her face. Elevator launch, just like we planned it. Ruby shouted to her teammates knowing they were in the home stretch. Weiss created a stair of glyphs for Blake to run up. After getting 30 or so feet in the air, Blake jumped onto the last glyph that was directly above that had her head facing directly towards the ground. Weiss put all her strength into her semblance to thrust Blake down to the ground as fast possible. Shooting through the air like a bullet, Blake readied her katana and slashed down on the Deathstalker's tail, cutting through it completely. Yang, back off, Ruby commanded, and Yang happily disengaged to give herself some time to catch her breath. Weiss, Blake, I need you to work together to freeze it to the ground. Ruby gave her next order. I can't, I'm out of dust, Weiss yelled back as the Deathstalker took a swing at her. Ruby started to panic. I don't know how else they can beat it. I thought she'd have enough dust for the whole plan. Ruby started to vocalize out loud. She was worried, she was scared for her friends, she wasn't sure what to do until an idea struck her. Naruto, I'm going out there, she told him firmly. She started to prepare herself to counter any argument he had. When she looked into his eyes she saw only warmth. You've learned the lesson I wanted to teach you anyways. Go give hell, little Reaper. Naruto gave her back a light push. With all the encouragement she needed, she took off after the rest of Team Deathstalker. Guys, I've got a plan, Ruby said as she arrived on the scene. There was a momentary flash of confusion on their faces until they all quickly accepted the help they could get. Lay it on us, sis, Yang said as she continued to recuperate from her intense grapple with the Deathstalker as Blake and Weiss kept it busy. Yang, can you keep its claws out of commission and keep it still again? Ruby asked. Yang gave an exhausted laugh. I can take care of one, no problem, but doing both again might be a little much. Yang admitted. Ruby started trying to adapt her plan to fit the new information. I can take one, Blake hollered over the sound of her katana parrying one of the Deathstalker's pincers. Well, that made things easier on Ruby. Alright, you two keep it still. Weiss, can you speed me into it? Ruby asked. Weiss flicked her offset ponytail. Can I sing a crowd to a standing ovation? She asked rhetorically. Ruby just looked at her slightly confused. Well, maybe. Yes I can. Weiss growled. Ruby looked at her exasperatedly. Why didn't you just say that? She asked Weiss incredulously. Hurry it up over there. Yang yelled as she used both her hands to hold the Deathstalker in place. Blake was standing back to back with her, sticking her katana in one of its joints to try and prevent as much movement as possible. Each was doing their utmost to prevent the Deathstalker's mandibles from biting down on them. All right, here I go, Ruby exclaimed as she used her semblance to zip a good 50 feet away from the Deathstalker. Weiss laid down a straight line of speed glyphs straight to the Deathstalker itself. Ah, Ruby shouted as she used a combination of Weiss glyphs and her semblance to rocket towards Deathstalker at breakneck speeds. Right as she was upon it, she jumped a small hop just barely over the Deathstalker's back. Swinging her scythe in a downwards arc, she did exactly what she hoped to do and bisected the beast completely. The light in the Deathstalker's eyes quickly went out as Blake and Yang finally relaxed. The grim slowly started to fade away as they looked to each other in happy camaraderie. Weiss herself had even found a new respect for classmates. Even worse, she had found a new respect for that insolent boy that helped them get here. Not to break up this happy moment, but did anyone other than Nora remember to pick up a relic? Naruto asked. Because I counted more student pairs on the launch pad than relics. It would really to have done all this just to fail because we didn't get one. The faces of everyone but Ren and Nora blanched. Suddenly their victory was forgotten as they all made a frantic mad dash back to the ruins. Naruto grinned as he saw the other 7 trailing closely behind him and felt a sense of contentment. He might not belong here, but maybe if he could help out those that did, it would make things worth it in the end. That was surprisingly mature of Mr. Uzumaki. Glinda Goodwitch said as she rewatched him forcing 4 other students out of combat to listen to his advice. She was honestly impressed. She was even more impressed when she saw the students fight better 3 strong than they had as 4. Mr. Uzumaki was not wrong in his teaching Ms. Rose that one group of 3 was more powerful than 4 groups of 1. Ospin admitted easily. He sipped his ever-present cup of coffee. What surprises me is that Young knows that lesson. Especially since he has not studied under any known huntsman. He has not attended any previous combat school, and in all matters otherwise is a complete and utter enigma. Why did you let him into the school with such a lack of vetting? Surely you could have looked into his past more even if you believed he genuinely deserved to attend, Glinda asked scholarly. Ozpin shrugged knowingly. It could have been the fact that I believed him to be more than he appears. Possibly it was that I thought he could do good for the students at this school as well as the entirety of Vale. Ozpin mused as he took another sip of coffee. Of course, he began, scoring over 9,000 on the aura measurement test may have had something to do with it. He smiled as if sharing a private joke. That didn't happen, Ozpin, that is impossible, Glinda reaffirmed, exhausted. Ozpin had claimed it several times already, but the scale that took the measurement in question was burned to a melted crisp. The data that was once on it could no longer be read. Glinda was convinced Ozpin knew that and had made up this story just to annoy her. Regardless, I must say I am rather impressed with Mr. Uzumaki. It seems like you said, he really was more than he appeared, Glinda humbly admitted her fault. Thinking that was that, she looked to Ozpin looking at her. His visage when she met his eyes could have defined smug. Remind me, Glinda. I believe I recall you saying that Mr. Uzumaki acted like a child. I also remember after you said that I disagreed with you. Even after that I also distinctly remember betting you 50 lie. Ozpin was caught off by a riding crop smacking him in the back of the head. Glinda stormed off to fix her temper before any of the students arrived back. Ozpin chuckled to himself. He was in pain, but he was 50 lean richer.